Okay, so I decided to come back to this. I did a live stream yesterday where I covered some of this video. Um, is my audio working? I hope my audio is working. Yep, I see it. Yesterday I did this live stream. I went over some stuff. There's some, there was, just to kind of recap, there was the fact that Jill blocked me and deleted my comments. Uh, then I decided to get into this, or I'd planned, and I did to some extent get into this debate between Mark Reed and Alex, Wi-Fi Gospel, where they debated Christian ethics versus secular humanism. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of recap a little bit of what I covered, where I got. So I went through their opening statements very quickly, and just to kind of recap what happened there. It seemed from Alex's opening statement, Alex was trying to argue or trying to drive the point home that basically if you have a society, a society that's set up where everybody is reporting under a tyrannical rule, everybody's self-reporting that everything is good, doesn't this work under secular humanism? It seemed that Alex was showing that he doesn't understand that there's actually a difference between, so you've got human beings, right? You go to the individual human being, the human beings, you go to humanity, the collective, then you go to society. He seemed to be trying to push that secular humanism. So this seems to be like more along the debate of is which is better for society, secular humanism or Christian ethics, right? So if we stick to secular humanism wouldn't have a problem with tyranny or a tyrannical, any kind of tyranny or anything like that, as long as everybody just says they're hunky dory. Mark disagrees with that because the problem is that secular humanism holds to this position of dignity, and basically that it recognizes that there's dignity to every human being, right? Alex was trying to say, well, what if the society didn't allow you to spend your free time whatever way you want, or you couldn't choose the job that you wanted, but everybody said but everybody self-reported that there was self-satisfaction. That's beyond that's there's an issue with that. Would he have a well, I'll keep going with that. I'm trying to remember everything that happened, but then there was also the idea that, well, what if there's these dregs of society, and what if we take those people and we do something to this small group of people that's bringing the majority of the society down, and we do something to them so that they don't affect the majority of society? Wouldn't secular humanism be okay with that? No, because now we have a tension within society, because now we're starting to look at some individuals as not having the same dignity as other groups of people, right? Regardless of whatever it is that class of that subculture or small group of people is doing within a society as a whole, it still goes against secular humanism if we start to basically degrade their dignity over the dignity of the majority. And you see that later on when it plays out. In fact, I think I've got it up here, right to the point where where Alex makes that argument.
When they appear to work. Secondly, if hypothetically Donald Trump and his political allies were to enact policies that essentially enslaved everyone except themselves, but raised the standard of living for every American, making households wealthier, healthier, and happier, and if these outcomes were verifiably positive by the standards of societal well-being and self-reported happiness, then on what basis, under Humanist Manifesto 3, could one objectively say it would be wrong for him to enact those policies?
It would be against because whatever dignity is being recognized it seems that the dignity of Donald Trump and his administration, they have the dignity or the consideration of not being put under that same system. So it's not there's a little bit of, I think, egalitarianism and utilitarianism, because he's trying to, under utilitarianism, it should be fine to basically have a tyrannical rule as long as everybody is doing okay. And if you have these select individuals, let's say Donald Trump and his administration, that get to, we can recognize that they have they seem to identify as having greater dignity, right? They are able to do whatever they want to do. They can spend their free time whatever way they want. They can choose the jobs whatever way they want. But then they're imposing rules that restrict the rest of society. Then there becomes that tension when it comes to dignity of humanity across the board, right? So that's a societal system that's like trying to utilize some kind of utilitarianism within to get the society that you want, regardless of whatever it costs individuals. So the ends justify the means kind of thing.
If societal values evolved such that benevolent authoritarianism or even slavery was viewed as beneficial for human flourishing, happiness, and health. Good night, buddy.
Which, don't get me wrong, I'm not sure if ends justify the means is necessarily utilitarianism, but I think it can be argued that way, but don't quote me on that. The problem, I started reading up on ethics, but I'm not too savvy on it. I just thought that some of the things that they start to discuss, once they get to the open discussion, those things kind of stood out. So right now I'm just kind of recapping what Alex was proposing, and Alex seemed to be demonstrating that he missed from the Human Manifesto 3 that the primary principle is recognizing that every human being has some kind of inherent dignity. And he's willing to, and now he's trying to argue, well, wait a minute, we could strip the dignity of some individuals in order to amplify the dignity of other individuals in order to make the society work better. But that's a tension. That's a problem.
All right, I'm live, okay?
I can skip through that.
All right, I promise that's the last one. I got 3 of them.
That's okay. Don't sweat it. They're always the priority. No worries.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. All right. If societal values evolved such that benevolent authoritarianism or even slavery was viewed as beneficial for human flourishing, happiness, and health, what could secular humanism appeal to?
Secular humanism would appeal to the fact that slavery is an undignified status for any human being. And so we have to remove slavery automatically because of its undignified, of the undignified state that we define it as.
In order to say it's wrong. In other words, if the results are maximally positive and the values guiding ethics are changeable and pragmatic, then why couldn't mass enslavement be justified so long as it works?
No, that's pragmatism. Pragmatism, that's the problem. The pragmatism would if you're saying, well, it works good, that's what works for the societal end of it, but not for the dignity of all human beings.
A worldview that says morality changes with consensus or outcomes cannot meaningfully condemn tyranny. It cannot meaningfully condemn tyranny, only inefficiency.
Sure, it can condemn tyranny. The Humanist Manifesto does, by saying it's undignified.
Now let's get into the positive case for Christian ethics. When we look at the data across key areas, morality, family, charity, mental health, civic life, and political stability, Christianity consistently produces better results than secularism.
Nope. There's actually a study that shows, well, I think he gets into one about suicide rates. There's a 2017 meta-analysis. The one that he quotes is like from 2015 or 2014, but then there was another one done later on in 2017. I think it was predominantly based in Ireland. No. Saw no difference.
Christianity gives society a stable, transcendent foundation for human duties and ethics, rooted in the nature of a just and loving God. Secular morality, by contrast, shifts with culture, public opinion, or government authority. If society defines right and wrong by consensus, then things like eugenics or rape are only wrong if enough people say so. Christianity says they're wrong always because morality comes from God, not man. A society that can't replace itself will collapse. Secular countries like Japan, South Korea.
See, now he's going to the society. Again, he's going to the society, not to the inherent, not to the very prime principle of human dignity. So if you needed to reduce the population of a given society, let's say we enact certain controls on how many people can reproduce because we have so many people, that might actually work better for human flourishing and for human dignity because you don't have a strain on resources. There's more to go around.
Germany and Canada.
You don't have people in these quote unquote undignified states of poverty and basically being food and being in starving and shit like that.
Fertility rates well below 1.5, well under the 2.1 replacement level. By contrast,
and that seems to be not flourishing. So it seems to be that he's trying to say, well, human flourishing is looked at in the way that human beings are actually repopulating or they're reproducing. I don't think that's necessarily where flourishing needs to end, or that's the end all be all of human flourishing, is that, well, if human beings are happy, they're going to basically have more sex and have more kids. No.
Church-going Christians average 2.4 to 2.6 children per woman, even in Western nations. Religious populations grow, secular ones shrink. And there's a study by the Pew Research.
And there's also a problem with that because some of the Christian denominations, like I think Orthodox Christianity and Roman Catholicism, specifically do not. You're not allowed. To use, women aren't allowed to, you're not allowed to use any kind of contraception, no condoms, no birth control at all. So that could be another reason why you have those higher birth rates, is because of the religious doctrines. People are part of that church. They don't want to be kicked out of the church, so they follow the rules of that church. And one of the rules is, if we get caught using birth control, we could get excommunicated. We could get kicked out of our church.
Shows that religious people and secular people, when they're in more religious countries, they actually have more children.
Religious people in secular countries. Hold on a second.
Study by the Pew Research that shows that religious people and secular people, when they're in more religious countries, they actually have more children.
Are you sure? I'd have to see that study.
Christians consistently give more and help more. A meta-analysis of 77 studies found religious people were significantly more.
Mark talks about that, and Mark says it's mostly within them giving within their own organizations, whereas atheists, non-believers will give more in general. But there's also, so you're looking at, are there more Christians in the United States, or at least people that identify as Christianity? Yeah. I think he said rate. So yeah, then it would be that, okay, so if it's a 1-to-1 comparison, 5 Christians as compared to 5 atheists, the 5 Christians will be more charitable at a higher rate than the 5 atheists will be, or the 5 non-believers will be, possibly. I don't know. I don't know what I don't have a link to whatever studies he's bringing up.
Likely to donate time and money, even to secular causes. In the U.S., weekly churchgoers give 3.5 times more to charity than the non-religious.
And apologies for this being kind of clumsy. I'm kind of doing this off the cuff. I got to work tonight. I've got some things going on, but I really wanted to get back to this. And like I said, right now I'm just kind of doing a recap of what I started doing yesterday, but then purposely distracted myself by engaging with someone in the live chat that I probably just shouldn't have done. It would have been better off just ignoring that individual and just continuing with this. So basically, I'm trying to do this so that it can be viewed on its own without someone having to go to the other video that I did yesterday and scour through that to find out what I covered there. I make some points there, but I'm trying to do it so nobody has to go back and reference the other video. They can just go to this. And like I said, there's not much. In my opinion, the most important stuff happens in the open dialogue between the two. Um, and you don't really have to listen to their opening statements in order to in order to get anything from the one-on-one conversation that they have after they give their opening statements. It's simply what I'm trying to point at is that Alex seems to have a problem distinguishing between humanity, and society. And Mark Reed's opening statement does a better job of explaining what secular humanism is, that secular humanism does not have a problem with Christianity, does not have a problem with lots of other religions. It doesn't outlaw any religions. It doesn't say that people can't participate in whatever religions that they want. Except that, it would obviously be an issue of if those religions were trying to support the trying to promote some kind of injustice or harm, or basically rendering other people to an undignified status or something like that. And then Mark does a good job of also pointing out that within Christianity, there's problems within Christianity because you have different denominations of Christianity and tensions just within Christianity where people have done horrible things. Catholics, right? Roman Catholics burnt Protestants at the stake for heresy, right? Those who didn't want to just say, well, we're not just gonna do whatever the church tells us. We can look to authority in the scriptures alone, kind of like the bringing about of sola scriptura. That was considered heretical. The authority of the church was through apostolic succession, not through just any Joe Schmo being able to read the Bible and saying, yeah, this is what it says, and that's what I'm going off of. The church was in Orthodox Christianity and Roman Catholicism, apostolic succession stands. And just with those religions, just within those denominations of Christianity, you have a lot of different schisms. You can see it with Calvinism, Arminianism, all sorts of different. You have people who hold to once saved, always saved. Others that hold to conditional salvation, and you can just watch these Christians argue it's not once saved, always saved. It's conditional salvation, and vice versa. Differing soteriologies, Christologies, all that kind of stuff, and eschatologies, and it doesn't work out very well. That's why you have so many denominations of Christianity, and the only reason that these different Christian denominations can do what they do in this country is because this country is a secular country. While it doesn't really hold to secular humanism, it is a secular nation. So it has laws that are set up that basically recognize all human beings as being equal under the law. And then whatever religions they have, they can play with that toy whatever way they want, barring that it doesn't fuck with anyone else.
So more likely to volunteer, even for non-religious organizations. Christianity commands love of neighbor, care for the poor, and self-sacrifice, not just empathy, but action. Religious belief, especially Christianity, protects mental health. A Swiss study of 3.7 million people found those with no religion were more than twice as likely to unalive themselves than Christians. Multiple meta-analysis confirm that religious people experience lower depression, less anxiety, and greater life satisfaction. Across every...
I'm going to see if I can find that real quick. Swiss study, suicide in Christian, and it's not in, it's religious people. It's not just Christianity, it's any religion. Yeah, there's a 2010 article here. This might be the one that he's referring to. Yeah, so suicide rates per 100,000 inhabitants were 19.7 in Catholics, 1,664 suicides, 28.5 in Protestants, so Protestants are higher than Catholics, with 2,158 suicides, and then 39% in those with no affiliation, 882 suicides. So they say no affiliation. They're not necessarily saying non-religious, just no. Yeah, they're saying like no religious affiliation. It doesn't mean they're necessarily a non-believer. So conclusions: in Switzerland, the protective effect of a religious affiliation appears to be stronger in Catholics than in Protestants, stronger in older than in younger people, stronger in women than in men, and particularly stronger for assisted suicides. There is a study here from PubMed from 2016. The abstract reads as, although religion is reported to be protective against suicide, the empirical evidence is inconsistent. Research is complicated by the fact that there are many dimensions to religion: affiliation, participation, doctrine, and suicide, ideation, attempt, completion. We systematically reviewed the literature on religion and suicide over the last 10 years, 89 articles, with the goal of identifying what specific dimensions of religion are associated with specific aspects of suicide. We found that religious affiliation does not necessarily protect against suicidal ideation, but does protect against suicide attempts. Whether the religious affiliation protects against suicide attempts may depend on the culture-specific implications of affiliating with a particular religion, since minority religious groups can feel socially isolated. After adjusting for social support measures, religious service attendance is not especially protective against suicidal ideation, but does protect against suicide attempts and possibly protects against suicide. Future qualitative studies might further clarify these associations. And I believe that this particular one here, so there's one in the United States. Try to get to the conclusions here, but the abstract basically said there doesn't seem to be. Yeah, importantly, religious affiliation is not protected in all samples. Um, Yep, and then right here it references the article, the study from 2010, or the meta-analysis. Yeah, this is a quite in-depth article. Okay, so the conclusion is, our review of the literature yields several important conclusions. Many studies indicate religious affiliation is protective against suicide attempts and suicide, but not suicidal ideation. Likewise, attendance at religious services is protective against suicide attempt, but not suicidal ideation after adjusting for social support. These studies suggest religion may inhibit a person from acting on suicidal ideas by providing access to a supportive community, shaping a person's beliefs about suicide, or providing a source of hope, providing ways of interpret suffering. This one doesn't have, this one doesn't seem to have, this one's a little bit different. Because there was one that referenced a study group out of Ireland. Um, yeah, there's been a lot of this. But it's also kind of funny that he would. And that's not the one either. There was one, and for some reason I can't find it. There was another one, and it was I think it was 2017. Yeah, it's right here. What year was this one? I thought it was 2017. 2018. Yeah. Yeah, this was the other one that this was the one that I found. And this was based out of Durkheim's seminal historical study demonstrated that religious affiliation reduces suicide risk, but it's unclear whether this protective effect persists in modern, more secular societies. They examined suicide risk according to Christian religious affiliation and by inference to examine underlying mechanisms for suicide risk. If church attendance is important, risk should be lowest for Roman Catholics and highest for those with no religion. If religiosity is important, then conservative Christians should fare best. And it was a 9-year study that followed 1,106,104 people aged 16 to 74 years at the 2001 UK census using Cox proportional hazard models adjusted for census-based cohort attributes. In fully adjusted models analyzing 1,119 cases of suicide, Roman Catholics, Protestants, and those professing no religion recorded similar risks. The risk associated with conservative Christians was lower than that for Catholics. And then it gets into the religious, the results, how they tallied everything. Yeah, in this study, suicide risk was generally the same for those, suicide risk was generally the same for those with or without a professed religious affiliation. Within the denomination groups tested, the risk for younger Catholics was about 20% higher than for mainstream Protestant denominations, and only those belonging to the more conservative Christian groups recorded lower relative risk at least up to age 55 years. No difference between men and women was recorded, and the findings are not due to coding differences at the death registration because the same pattern was found for definitive suicide, where suicide intent was clear. So yeah, there's a lot out there. You can run down this, but yeah, he basically did what a lot of Christians do. He found a study. He didn't go any further. He just went with a study that supports his argument and went from there. But clearly, if he'd have done a little bit more, gone to a little bit, gone to like the more recent studies, he'd have found that that's not. Again, and there's the problem with the distinction between whether or not there's suicidal ideation or suicide attempt. Those are two different things.
Every category, moral grounding, family sustainability, generosity, mental health, and peace, Christianity outperforms secularism. The data is clear. Christianity makes society.
Yeah, but that was the study that he cited wasn't about Christianity. It was about religious affiliation. Now, even though in that one it talked about Protestants and Christians and non-believers, there's some studies out there that just talk about religious affiliation in general, not Christianity not necessarily being the one. I think there's one that does more, that even looks at like Islam and Judaism and Hindus and stuff like that. But
thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And Mark, I believe you wanted to share screen, so feel free to pop it up on Specstation.
see, it's really funny because he's speaking, he's able to have this conversation about this because he lives in a secular society, just like Mark Reed does. There's a lot of Christians where Mark Reed lives, but it's secular society. And so it allows for all these differing kinds of Christian denominations to basically exist within the same national demographic as a whole, and without them tearing the country apart. Because if you put one Christian denomination as the head of the society, as the societal, or that which is dictating what laws we need to follow, how we need to comport ourselves, stuff like that, you're going to run into some problems with the other Christian denominations.
I did, yes.
Whereas secular humanism, you're not going to have that. It just runs itself on the principle of, okay, let's treat everybody. Let's recognize that people have this inherent dignity, and go from there. And then we will build up from that. Then we'll recognize as we go along, we'll recognize new challenges, things that are possibly harmful, how we can mitigate harm. There may not be ways of completely eliminating harm, but to mitigate harm and go from there. And then we can, from those ises, maybe we can develop some oughts and go from there. But that's not what Alex wants. Alex thinks that Christianity is the best because Christianity will just tell you that this is coming from a divine commander. Don't do this. Do that. It's not open for discussion. It's not open for reasoning. It came from God. Just do it. He knows better. End of story.
Just 1 second. Sorry, I probably should have done that while I was talking. Just one
That's
second.
okay.
Hey, Trustee 8. Oh, hey, Tilting Windmill.
There we go.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze
As well, with the goal of secular.
This
is
is secular
helping
humanism. Yep.
Sort of.
And like I said, and like I said before, Mark does a really good job of explaining what secular humanism is. Kind of shoots back at Alex a little bit, because he was listening to what Alex was saying. Then he gets into problems with Christianity, Spanish conquest, denomination problem, the Chalcedonian Schism, the Albigensian Crusade, however you pronounce that. Then there's the Great Schism. And then he sums it up why secular humanists are aware that we are all equal stakeholders on this planet. So again, it starts with all human beings as being seen as equal stakeholders, being seen with some kind of inherent dignity. Then we discover more. We realize that our position on this planet may be tenuous. We believe that it is up to humans to save humans, which may take all of us working together to accomplish.
Do closing statements. We will read and respond to your kind super chats that come in. And then, of course, per usual, we will go into open. We will the floor open.
Basically, I asked a question about
Yeah, so I'm just going to start over because I didn't actually get that far into this conversation. And there's some thoughts that I have. I might have some different more to add to something that Alex brings up here in a little bit.
Descriptions. Do you deny the Humanist Manifesto, or do you agree with it?
No, I agree with it. Sure.
Cool. So I just have a couple questions.
Well, even I agree with parts of it. You don't have to agree to the whole thing. I don't have a problem with it. I'm not a secular humanist, and I don't have any problem with it.
Based on the scenarios I gave, the two scenarios. The first
sure,
one,
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure we both agree that society should be safer, healthier, and more prosperous, right?
Mm-hmm. He started from the wrong. He's starting from the society. So he seems to be on the debate that which is better for society, right? Secular humanism or Christianity. The question, though, is which is better, secular humanism versus Christianity? So in order to have a society, we have to look at what makes up a society, and that's the humans. And he seems to be trying to push, I want to look at what's best for making this society prosper, not necessarily what's better for looking at every human being able to prosper.
And we use data. Okay.
Well, you brought up like what would stop humanists, like what in the Humanist Manifesto would stop this. In the Humanist Manifesto, it talks a lot about the dignity of people and freedom, basically, liberty in order to enjoy our lives. So I don't know like what you understand about the Humanist Manifesto, but I don't see how you could enslave people or do any of the things that you're talking about and still have dignity and freedom to live your life.
Yeah, that's exactly what I brought up. And that's based on what, I mean, that's as far as I'm concerned, what Mark Reed is bringing up is a no-brainer. And if he had actually read the Humanist Manifesto, he would have seen right there in the Humanist Manifesto 3 that it's about recognizing all human beings as having an inherent dignity. And I'm paraphrasing. So if you want to argue, oh well, you know what, we can enslave some people as long as it works for the betterment of society, that's going to be against secular humanism. Under secular humanism, humanity needs to get together and figure out better ways for one another to live together without having to render people into that position.
Well, basically, you said it's based on utilitarianism. So if this,
yes.
so
yeah,
if the
yeah, and so if the utility, and this is the problem, he thinks the utility is for a society reaching some level of success. The utility to secular humanism is the dignity, is recognizing the principle of dignity first. If you recognize, I want my society to run a particular way, regardless of the humans that live in it, and as long as they're reporting at least that they seem to be okay, well, then we're good. Even if I treat them undignified. If I am a tyrant and I have the ability to do whatever the hell I want and spend my days whatever the way I want, but I'm putting out rules or dictates that basically diminish the rest of my fiefdom or whatever to not having those particular liberties, then is that not undignified? Why don't they have the ability to do that? Where is that dignity? Why do I, as the tyrant, have this ability, but the rest of humanity does not? And he would say, well, it's under the utility that the society works. That's the problem. It doesn't work for the individual dignity as the principle.
util was that society was thriving, that everybody was thriving, then their freedoms, we could stomp on a little bit of freedom for that, right?
Yes, he's got it wrong.
What's the utility?
So if, let's see here, if we could imagine that data showed that a certain group based on region, income, or intelligence,
Yeah, I asked
constantly
a question.
Oh wait, I thought you were saying.
Do you know what the
utility
utility is? Yeah.
In utilitarianism?
Well, utilitarianism doesn't tell you what utility they're using. It's just that they
Right.
prioritize a utility. So I'm asking if you know what utility secular humanists are prioritizing.
The overall well-being of human society.
No.
What would it be then?
It would be human well-being. So yeah, you could change.
See, he doesn't know the difference. That was the key thing that I found, and I it's still funny to watch him do that. I'm going to repeat it again, even though I repeated it yesterday. It's funny to see that confusion.
Utility secular humanists are prioritizing.
The overall well-being of human society.
No.
What would it be then?
It would be human well-being. So yeah, you could chain up.
He doesn't know the distinction between human well-being and human society. He wants the society of humanity to take priority, not human well-being. He doesn't understand the difference. He thinks they're one and the same. That's why he was confused. If we focus on society first, then humanity will automatically just do whatever humanity has to do in order for the society to be whatever it needs to be, right? And that's like having a system where you have like a computer system, and then you have particular viruses on your system, and your program isolates those viruses from your system in order to preserve the functionality of the rest of the system, regardless of whatever's happening to those those harmful programs, what's deemed harmful. Right? That's essentially what he was trying to argue in a way, was like, well, wait a minute. What if secular humanism says that we have these group of individuals or this class of individuals that's harmful to society and are causing problems within the majority of the society? Wouldn't it be good to basically segregate them, isolate them, pack them away somewhere in order for the society, the system as a whole, to operate at a better level? That wouldn't be within the realm. That would be a violation of secular humanism. What's going on with these individuals?
and basically, do all of this stuff to make the society flourish, but people would not be well. And as I put it in my introduction, there's got to be a balance between people being having their well-being seen to, and people, the society having its well-being. So basically what I put across was that we have a hierarchy, and this was all in my introduction, of these certain rights we can give people based upon what people need to be well, right? So you've got a hierarchy of things like physiological needs, like food, water, shelter, things like that, physical needs. You've got psychological needs, which are things like love, belonging, and this is
see
all,
that, and that's the thing. I think Mark, I mean, kudos to Mark, but I think Mark is talking too much to Alex. And first of all, if you really want to instruct someone like Alex, I would ask, because Mark sometimes does, he kind of gives me that. And I don't have any problem with this, but he kind of comes off as someone like trying to teach or instruct someone on some new information, right? Or maybe they have a misconception of something, and so he's trying to correct that misconception. The real trick with someone like Alex, who's seems probably very indoctrinated, very cemented in his lack of a better term, his dogmatism, his Christian dogmatism. Ask him if he knows the difference between human society and human well-being, because he looked confused. And I don't know if Mark just didn't notice it and he's just carrying on, but that's the most important thing. Because he said, oh, it's this, and then Mark said, no, it's this, no, it's not, and then he said, well, what is it? And then he said this. Alex took those as being one and the same. And so Mark, in my opinion, would have been better off, not saying he's doing anything wrong here, would have been better off asking Alex, do you understand the distinction? Because you'll get far better if he starts to understand that it's not about society first, it's about the dignity of the human individuals that we start with.
all understood very well in psychology and sort of neurology. It's not unknown. You have higher things such as at the very top you've got sort of development, right? Like being able to be fulfilled, like having some kind of goal and being the best person you can be. Self-actualization is what it's called. So we can sort of say, hey, these are the basic rights that we need to be well because we know what they are. And then we can say, hey, as long as you're doing no harm, then you can go for other things. But this whole thing about, well, if you enslave people, you will have well humans. I don't think that's the case.
Okay, but
I think they'll be very unwell.
If all of those metrics are met, and the only thing is that you're enslaved, such as I have an example.
He's looking at the metrics. As long as the metrics are met for the society, the problem is, what about the metrics as it pertains to every human being individually? He seems to have a problem with that.
Here.
And when I say problem, a problem understanding the distinction between the two. Well, as long as the metrics are being met for the societal end, everything's good. So as long as if we can basically render, let's say 15% of our population to slavery in order to benefit the 85% of society, then secular humanism should say, that's great, right? No. Because it renders 15% of the population to an undignified status.
That you can't pick your job, you can't pick where you live, stuff like that, where your freedoms are highly limited. But all of those other metrics are met. You have high life satisfaction, you're wealthy, you're prosperous, everybody's happy, you get 4 days off a week. Like, all of this stuff is great, except you have very limited freedom in what you can do with your.
You could argue this under monarchism, and that's what Christianity supports. The idea of a divine entity telling you what you can and cannot do. So at best, he's not making Christianity out to be any better if he says, well, look, if people are being like this, but they report high satisfaction, then it's great. Okay, then let's look at it from a Christian perspective, like let's look at the let's look at the let's change up the story. Let's change up the narrative to the Dark Ages. And everybody was under, the church was highly, the church is the one who basically recognized and was the one that recognized, had the apostolic succession, recognized a particular king for that society. Yeah, hon. Oh, the water's running. You may want to take her out front.
Your hobbies and your work. Wouldn't that
Yeah.
be under?
What was I saying? It doesn't matter. Anyway, this is kind of funny because if you have a church that's basically running as kind of like the parliament for the king, to basically tell the people, hey, you need to do what this king says, because this king, we as the church know that God is the one that ordained this particular man to be your king. So you need to recognize that. And then whatever that king says is basically, that king becomes God's messenger on earth, God's authority, an authority of God on earth. And then tells people, and then limits what people can and can't do. And then tells people they actually can't have their own personal belongings. That they always work for the church, they always work for the king, they work for the benefit of the king. That is their life. They restrict everything about their life. But everybody says, hey, this seems great, because as long as everybody reports some kind of satisfaction, then it's great, right? So now you're just stuck with Christian with some kind of religious monarchism versus something else. And you're saying, oh, they can both be one and the same.
secular humanism?
No,
Why not?
because we need.
But then he would say, well, no, you can't have that under Christianity. Christianity teaches against that. And then Mark can go, exactly. So does secular humanism. Secular humanism says that that's wrong too. But that didn't stop the church from doing it. And again, it's the same hypothetical. As long as everybody's reporting that everything's hunky-dory under some kind of Christian monarchism, you're good. Or Christian monarchy, you're fine.
When you take into account self-actualization, it isn't necessarily you're trying to equate what we call happiness, or the maximal happiness, with pleasure. And that's not the same thing. It's not your temporary joy. It's not your, in the future, like you're just getting some kind of enjoyment from something. What we're talking about with the greatest happiness principle is your overall life satisfaction, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean days off, as you put it. Like that's incidental. Each person can choose for themselves what they think is their self-fulfillment. As long as they're not harming others, then that is the way that we go. That is the way that we maximize happiness. And by happiness, I don't mean temporary short-term enjoyment of something. I mean life satisfaction by that.
Right. And how do you measure life satisfaction?
With science, as I put it in my, we can measure that using a variety of tools to say, hey, we can measure.
It's kind of like how we found out that slavery is probably not really a good thing. We practiced it for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and then kind of came to the conclusion, yeah, it's not a good thing. But he would say, oh no, it was Christianity that did that. Oh, how progressive of it.
Sort of, it's interesting because one of the things you sort of said was that, Christians give more to charity and things like that. And that's an interesting study, which I think is a bit misleading, because Christians give a lot more to their churches as well, and that sort of skews the study. But it is true that they give more. But another study says that Christians only give more to other Christians. It's in fact atheists who will give charity and do things for people without knowing or caring whether they're Christian, Muslim, Hindi. They will give more to what's called their out group more than Christians.
So I just want to get back to the life satisfaction thing, so that's a different point.
Sure.
So if I tell you that I'm satisfied with my life, you wouldn't believe me?
What do you mean?
So everything, my job, whatever I pursue in my life.
But that's on your individual level. So now Alex he was arguing for society as a whole before. Now he's going to him as an individual. He's not staying on track with what he argued before. Originally, he was putting society, and he thought that they were basically one and the same, and I think he still does. So as long as he is a representative of that, and then there's other human beings that are representative of that, then everything is fine.
My life satisfies me.
Which that would be from the bottom up. But it sounded like when originally he was talking from the top down. The society comes first. And as long as the society has these people that are, for the most part, self-reporting that they're okay, then secular humanism would secular humanism be fine with that? And it was weird because he started adding things like, oh, what if they don't have the freedom to do certain things? What if they can't spend their free time doing whatever they want to do? Well, what if you have a Christian ruler who says you can't do anything on Saturday? You have to obey the Sabbath. You can't work on Saturday. You have to, if you do, you'll be stoned.
Why wouldn't I believe you?
All right, so it's a self-report. So if
Yeah, from an individual, but you were going from society as a whole and then being able to ostracize some within a society in order to benefit the society as a whole. Now you're talking from an individual standpoint. So Mark is right. Why wouldn't I believe you? So what's your point?
everybody self-reports that they are highly satisfied with their life in this scenario that I gave to you, why would that go against secular humanism?
If everybody reports that they're satisfied with their life, would they be satisfied with their life?
Seems like it.
So if you couldn't go and see your friends, if you were restricted in what you worked, if you were restricted in such a way, you would be satisfied with that?
In this scenario, it's a hypothetical.
In this scenario. So in this
in that scenario, yeah, you can flip the scenario and go, okay, let's do it with Christianity. You don't actually own your own shit. You're a serf. The land that you have, the land that you work, you're just basically a tenant. You're just basically a tenant farmer. You're there working on this potentate's land, and he gives you, you're essentially a slave. But you report overall job satisfaction because you have a roof over your head, you get food, you just got to do your work, you go to church, and as long as you have protection from the elements and from raiders and from whoever might be out there, you're good. High life satisfaction. And who's the one that recognized the king as the ruler? The church. The Christian church did.
Where you've changed the entire idea of what human nature is and how humans behave, you basically are saying, well, if you're satisfied, why couldn't it be that way under secular humanism?
In this hypothetical, if these people are satisfied without having the freedom to.
Yes. So he's essentially saying that humanity's mindset would change to where they would be fine being not basically having a lot of liberties taken away from them. The problem with this is whether or not they had liberties before and then the liberties are taken away from them versus the society, the individuals coming together, establishing the society with those restricted liberties already in place as they develop the society. That's the bottom up. So societies are developed from humans coming together. So there seems to be this with Alex, he can't seem to keep his bottom down or bottom up or top down or bottom up approach in check.
To do certain things that we have the freedom to today, but report life satisfaction, then would it be against secular humanism?
Yeah.
How?
Because we understand what makes life satisfaction. And you could say, hey, I'm satisfied under that. But somebody would go, well, would you be more satisfied if you also had these freedoms to go wherever you want and do whatever you want to do? And they probably would be, wouldn't they?
Well, if the data showed, again, this is a hypothetical. So if the data shows.
If the data shows to what utility? To the benefit of the people or to the benefit of the society? Is the metadata to look towards the benefit of the society or to the benefit of individuals as a whole or individuals? Again, he seems to have a problem keeping that straight. Well, I don't think he does understand the difference, in my opinion.
Is that people have more life satisfaction under this benevolent authoritarianism regime, then that would be the more secular humanist regime, right?
When did it become benevolent? His example wasn't benevolent. It was just Donald Trump. Does he think Donald Trump is benevolent? That's interesting how he added benevolent in there.
So you're basically saying that if you make data up, because we know that people are not more satisfied under. No. You're saying if they were.
Well,
right?
it's a purely hypothetical. It's purely hypothetical, and it's not based on any real examples. He's just saying, well, wouldn't this be fine? Sure. Then what you can do is you can grant it. It would be in violation of secular humanism because it seems that there would be more dignity in human beings having more freedom and more liberties, the ability, more ability to choose and not being restricted for the sake of the society as a whole. That's just looking at those examples. But this doesn't mean that you could grant that, but Christianity would be the same thing. Christianity doesn't prevent that. If it's a benevolent ruler, then it's fine. He's not giving anything under that. He's not giving where Christianity is better than that. They had stuff like that back in the Middle Ages under Christianity. Serfs and lords. But under those systems, people weren't exactly satisfied. And that's essentially what you're saying. Are you saying that you're basically bringing up a hypothetical situation where you have a lord and you have his serfs, and as long as all the serfs are reporting overall life satisfaction, then that system should stand, and that's what and then that system, that societal construct meets the goal of secular humanism. It doesn't. Because one person has more dignity than the rest. The Lord.
The thing is that we know from studying dictatorships that people are not more satisfied under them. So you're basically saying if reality somehow changes, that people become more satisfied
I don't know
being
what
oppressed.
I'm saying.
I mean, in this magical world somewhere, that reality changes and people are suddenly happy at being oppressed and have violence used
Ignorance
against
is
them,
bliss,
and all
maybe.
of this stuff, then yeah, maybe that would be acceptable. But we don't live in that reality, Alex. So, well, I want to ask you a question.
Well, the thing is that people did live in that reality. They just didn't report. I don't know if I don't know if there was ever a serfdom where you could go and look for the data where all those people that were serfs reported high life satisfaction. And the interesting thing is it doesn't I mean, if you look up the Slavery Convention of 1927, or no, it's the supplement. It's the 1955 supplement for the Slavery Convention. Serfdoms are specifically covered. They were added.
If your God commands you, or you believe that your God commands you, that those people should be oppressed and in that situation and enslaved, isn't that the moral thing to do?
In a world where God would be that way, yes.
What wouldn't that be this world?
No.
Well, what's the rules for slavery in the Bible then? Exodus 21.
So we can definitely go down that, right? So what does it say?
Okay, well, let's go down that route.
What's the verse say?
Look, if you're talking about the manifesto not having, sort of clear rules that you're not allowed to enslave people, let's talk about the Bible having clear rules.
It's just
about how
but I'm willing to go down.
Let me finish. Having clear rules about literally how much you're supposed to beat your slave. If they don't die in a couple of days, then you're not punished at all for beating your slave. I mean, tell me
Well, it doesn't actually give a specific rule as to how much you can beat your slave. It's just, if you beat your slave and they die, then obviously something's going to happen to the master. But if you beat the slave and for some reason they don't get up after a couple days, if they linger for a couple days or survive a couple days and then they die, yeah, nothing happens to you.
If I'm wrong.
Well, in the same way that if a prisoner in our prison systems, I'm not exactly sure how that works in Australia. I'm guessing it's similar to the US. If they disobey
This is funny. I love this prison thing.
the prison guards, they get beaten to submission, correct?
No, they don't. If the prisoners in a prison don't do what the guards say, then they get beaten into submission. No, they don't. Yeah, we got to this yesterday. But yeah, this one's hilarious. Alex has never heard of a force continuum.
It doesn't say anything about disobeying.
Why would they get beat then?
Well, because if the master beats their slave and he doesn't die in a couple of days, then they are not to be punished for beating their slave.
Well,
and why is he equating? And the other problem is why is he? Now Alex has basically brought in. Well, prisoners are basically the same thing as slaves. Really? So the slaves in antebellum South were prisoners? Oh no, but it is the case that so not all slaves are prisoners, but all prisoners are slaves. Is that the logic? Just curious.
For other prescriptions as well, such as if you harm them, like if you damage their eye, for example, they get to go free. There's also other prescriptions.
Yeah, they get to go free. That being the operative word.
That say if your master is not treating you well, you can flee, and the Hebrew next to you has to take you in.
Nope. I covered this yesterday. That's Deuteronomy 23 that he's misrepresenting. They don't have to take them in. They can come in. They can live wherever they want. They're not to oppress them. They can go wherever they want. There's no, the way that you read that section of Deuteronomy 23, there's nothing saying that the Israelites are obligated to give them shelter or to not give them back to their master. It's just they're not obligated to return them.
Because of your master beating you.
No,
we can go to
it doesn't actually say that the slave was actually being beaten at all or being abused. It doesn't say anything like that.
Yeah, that's literally in there. We can go to them.
Well,
no, it's not literally in there.
What amazes me with
your
let me
finish.
Okay.
You're saying that
and the slave and is he saying that the slave? So he brought up prisoners as being slaves. So it's fine to beat prisoners if they don't work, but so slaves, it's perfectly fine for a slave to be beaten, right? If they don't comply. Is a slave the same as a prisoner? Are all slaves guilty of are all the slaves that you're talking about, were they guilty of crimes? And that was their sentence, was to be the slave of, to be the property of someone?
Bible, we have this, you can beat your slave, you can own slaves and beat them. So that's the same exact thing you can do under secular humanism. There's nothing in the manifesto that says that you can't do that.
No, but it's undignified.
Well, yeah, it says to respect the dignity and the freedom of people. So I don't see
unless they're a prisoner.
Excuse me.
It doesn't say unless they're a prisoner. I think it says of all people.
Do you not understand that, like, when the manifesto says, hey, we uphold the dignity of humanity and the freedom of people to live free, that is in direct contradiction to slavery, while at the same time you're saying, well, it's got rules for beating your slave, but feasibly that could happen under secular humanism, when secular humanism's pronouncements are just in opposite to what you're saying.
So the
other problem is that when it comes to prisoners, it depends on the mental state, what these people, who these people are, and what they're doing. How are they respecting the dignity of other people, right? If you have a murderer, you have somebody who's intentionally killed someone, then obviously they don't care about the dignity of another person's life, right? Or the value of another person's life or their freedoms, right? You take away a person's life, you take away everything they have, right? Everything they're going to have. So what do we do with them? We imprison them. They violated a social contract. So we incarcerate them. And in some cases, we even put them to death. Now, there's arguments for death penalty, the ethics of the death penalty versus lifelong imprisonment. I'm not going to get into that, but that's predominantly what imprisonment is about. Now, the 13th Amendment allows for slavery in the cases of punishments for crimes. However, the 13th Amendment does not say, let me make sure I've got that right. It does not specifically state that imprisonment or being a prisoner is a slave. I'm trying to find the actual, there it is. Yeah, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So it says, except as a punishment for a crime. Does it say anything about incarceration? Does being a slave necessitate someone being incarcerated? This has been argued for many, many years. Whether or not prisoners are akin to slaves. And then whether or not prisoners should be given hard labor. Because it's like slave labor.
Secular humanism completely opposed to prisons?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So what do we do with criminals then, Mark?
Rehabilitative.
And how do we rehabilitate them?
Do you mean prisons as in the style you're talking about, where people are beaten all the time?
No, American prisons.
American prison.
But I think he made the. Well, I think Alex already basically implied that in American prisons, if prisoners don't do what the guards say, the guards are within their rights to beat them into submission, which is not correct at all. And it's supposed to be a fine line between there's supposed to be a balance between rehabilitation and punitive. So the incarceration is punitive, then the rehabilitation happens while they're incarcerated, while they're under that punishment of incarceration. Incarceration is the punishment, not slavery.
What? So
Yeah.
you think that
My brother and I talked about this. My brother had a much better explanation too. He had I can't remember what his he had a really good counter for this, and I can't remember it. I don't want to misrepresent it. I wish he was here to throw it out there, but it was better than what I'm doing.
a
It almost granted imprisonment as being slavery, and then he went from there. It was fun.
run prison that makes money from sheltering people and working them on, almost criminally low wages is a moral thing to do.
So now here's the thing. In a prison
No,
system,
answer the question.
I am answering the question. In that specific prison system, I'm not saying everything that's done there is moral, but you said working them at extremely low wages. How do you think a prison system can afford to open? They either have to take money from other people.
Well, there's sometimes a distinction between what's moral and what's ethical. There's sometimes some nuance there, but
via taxes, or they have to have the criminals work. Now, I don't know about you, but if you commit a crime and are duly processed and you're a negative effect on society, I want you to work in a prison system, till your own land, get your own food, make your own clothes. Yes, I don't want to pay for that after you have a negative onset of society. Now, is it always a perfect way? Can we always do that? No, that's why we pay taxes.
Why wouldn't you? You want them to till their own food, then they basically become an independent society. They're not custodians, they become a subculture. That's not smart, Alex.
Taxes to have these systems in place.
You would still have to give them water and electricity, because they're not allowed to roam free. They're not allowed to go and get these particular resources while they're being incarcerated. So you would still have the government funneling their funneling money into them in order for them to live in this self-contained society. But it's not even really a self-contained society, because again, their resources have to come from somewhere. They can't go out and get resources. They're incarcerated.
Oh, how very moral of you. Okay, so the way I basically see it
You
is
don't
that
think
we
criminals
want
should
human,
work for their own food?
excuse me, I'm actually in the middle of talking,
Well, you
Alex.
just- you made it-
You've had
you-
your say. You've had your say.
Yeah, but
Stop.
you just
Stop.
you
Stop,
said how
Alex.
moral of you. I
Alex.
needed to.
Alex.
Let's get through
Alex.
let's let Mark get through the point, and then Alex, you can most certainly get back to where you left off after that if you want.
So under secular humanism, opposed to this Christian doctrine of authoritarianism, basically we would just say, hey, what we're after is human well-being. And we know through studies and science and the examples of other countries that rehabilitative prisons that are run in order to stop and give people a chance not to be criminals anymore are way more effective than the punitive idea, the punishment systems of the US that also use private prisons. So they have no compulsion to rehabilitate people because they make money from people going back into the system.
I think
What
that's kind of
secular
funny.
humanists do is
There's also an issue here that there was another easier way to, I think I might have brought this up. There's a faster way of stumping this whole prison thing under Christian ethics, right? The prison thing, in my opinion, is kind of a red herring. In 2 Kings chapter 4, there is a story there about a widow. Her husband died and he had unpaid debts. The creditors, she pleads with Elisha that she needs help because her husband died, has unpaid debts, and the creditors are going to come and take her two sons as slaves. Are those prisoners? Elisha doesn't say that this is wrong. Instead, there's a kind of like a loaves and the loaves and the fishes miracle that happens, but it happens with a small jar, with a jar of oil, where Elisha tells this woman and tells her sons to go to her neighbors and get all the empty containers that they're willing to give, and then she uses this one container of oil to fill up all these other empty vessels, and then sells the oil in order to pay off her dead husband's debt, so that the creditors do not take her sons as slaves. Is that the kind of Christian system that Alex wants us to live in? Because that wasn't wrong.
they look at what provides the well-being for humans, including criminals. Not let's make them, suffer, because that leads
and the other problem is that you don't have most of the narratives you have, especially when it came to the indentured servitude of fellow Israelites. Those weren't prisoners; they were debt slaves. That's what's actually kind of being brought up in Exodus 21. The chattel slaves are in like 21:4. It's the wife that's given to the unmarried Hebrew who sells himself to a fellow Hebrew. If he has children with her and he wants to go out on the 7th year, the children, the wife that he was given by the master and the children that he had with that woman stay. They never go free. They stay with the master. The only way the Hebrew slave gets to stay with his wife and children is if he swears to stay with his master for life.
to reoffending and the recidivism rates that we see in the US, which are absolutely out of control. So that's the difference. It's not about punishing them in prison. It's about rehabilitating them into society and providing them with another option. Not, we understand.
No, actually, hold on a second. Be right back, folks. I gotta take care of something real quick. And I'm back.
And this through psychology. So, here is a classic example of why Christian sort of ethics is really bad, because you're still working under eye for an eye, punish these people, make them suffer. It doesn't actually help if your goal is to have less crime. What does help? Rehabilitation.
See, this is a problem, because when you talk for long periods of time, you throw out like 5 different points. So I'm going to try to remember all of them and address them now. One, you said how moral of you. Don't answer yet because I want to get through all of this. Do you believe that criminals shouldn't work for their food? I think that's pretty obvious. 2, you said that if you have a punitive system.
Where do they get the resources to work for their own food, Alex? Where do they get the water? Where do they get the electricity? Or do they live in like how do you want prisoners to work for their own food?
Then that doesn't mean less crime because of recidivism. I would ask you a second question. Remember these because I have to get through all the points. We can't just go back and forth here. That you would have to say that having high punishments for crime doesn't deter criminals. So, like, for example, the death penalty, if you have the death penalty for certain crimes, that's going to deter people.
No. This is a mistake. He's running on a false. There's been multiple studies that show that the death penalty does not lead to lower murder rates.
From committing that crime, regardless of recidivism. And then there was a third point you said, rehabilitative prisons. These systems do not operate apart from slavery. The state owns these people. They tell them when they can go to bed, what time they can eat.
Well, there's a custodial aspect, but it still doesn't matter. It still doesn't diminish the fact that under Christian ethics, you still have slavery. So they're still equal with one another. He's just saying, well, see, but remember that this is a secular society. This isn't necessarily falling under secular humanism. How would if all of the United States were to adopt moral ethics, how would they treat these prisoners? How would prisoners be dealt with? Well, adulterers would be stoned. Thieves would probably have something lopped off. Or rapists would just, if a person rapes a woman, as long as she's not betrothed, then he's just forced to marry her, and he can never divorce her. Now, if it's a man that rapes a woman and he's caught doing it, then he's killed.
What they can eat. They tell them what's appropriate behavior and what's inappropriate behavior. And if in a rehabilitative prison somebody acts out of line,
because that's the problem with Christian ethics. If he's referring to Christian ethics, is he referring to Christian? Is he going to refer to like the 613 laws in the Old Testament as like an ethical standpoint for society, as how we should run society today? What Christian ethics is he running? What Christian ethics is he saying need to be followed in society that's better than secular humanism? Well, you're commanded to love your neighbor as yourself. What does that mean? What if your neighbor doesn't love himself? Where do you go from there? Well, then there's a problem with that person. Okay, how does Christianity propose that we deal with somebody who's commanded to love their neighbor as themselves but doesn't love themselves? So therefore they don't love their neighbor as themselves. What do you do about the you're also commanded to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul? What do you do with those people? Are you promoting some kind of cultural Christianity, that people be cultural Christians but not actual true believers? They comport with the ethical standards, but they don't actually truly believe that they don't need to love God with all their heart, mind, and soul? Or heart, mind, and body, or whatever. I can't remember what that is exactly. It's something in that line.
and they get physical or they start swearing and yelling and going crazy, they will get pinned to the ground, handcuffed, and thrown in a cell. So
well,
you
they're
don't.
already in a cell, dude. In prison, the prisoners normally stay in cells. They're normally locked up at night. And you have different prison systems. They have pod systems and stuff like that. But normally at night, the prisoners are, they have assigned cells. They go to those cells, and they're locked in their cells for a particular period of time. The cells open up that they can actually be in the common area, out in the main area, and stuff like that. Normally there's other normally the other would, if you have a guard, depending on the severity of whatever's happening with a prisoner, if a prisoner's going crazy or attacking another prisoner, or two prisoners are fighting, normally they're separated, then something has to be done. But again, it's based on a force continuum within that security guards are taught, and then somebody or both are put into isolation, which there's been arguments about whether or not that kind of solitary confinement, whether solitary confinement is actually ethical.
Escape this problem, Mark. Go ahead.
Okay, so first off, the working for you.
The problem is that he's running off this idea that secular humanism doesn't have a problem. Secular humanism isn't being utilized in these systems. This is a secular society. It doesn't hold to secular humanism. So again, I don't know what he's talking about.
For your food, I'm all in favor of sort of prisoners being given opportunity to do work programs in order to build up something to reintegrate with society. I'm all in favor of that. But working for your food and working for the profit of a company are two totally separate things. And you're already supporting this. It does not mean less crime. Yes, the statistics show that if like countries like Denmark, like Finland, like Sweden, Norway, these rehabilitative systems do produce less crime because people are given more of an opportunity to be a productive member of society. Death penalty does not help. It does not help in the slightest. We can tell from the death penalty that A, it's more expensive. B, it doesn't actually work in preventing crime.
And there's been a lot of people who have been unjustly killed.
You would think it does, but it doesn't. State owns people. No, they don't. They never own them. They are guardians for them while they are incarcerated. It's not a matter of ownership. No one is ever owned by the state, and that's a really important point.
And it doesn't really matter. He hasn't. Again, that's not secular. The prison system that we have today does not adopt secular humanism, and it's an unfortunate system where you have individuals that don't seem to want to. You have a system set up so that when you have people that don't want to basically abide by the social contract of a nation, of course there's due process and all that, and then they can be fined. There's all sorts of punitive measures, fines, community service, and up to imprisonment and stuff like that. Again, not secular humanism. It's a tension in secular humanism how to possibly make that better. But those systems, our country is not based on secular humanism. It's a secular country. It doesn't necessarily comport to secular humanism.
That you've completely missed. And it sort of shows just how under this idea of Christianity you are, that you think that the state owns people. It does not. Those prisoners still have the same rights as everybody else.
Wait. Why are you getting on my HDMI? There you go. Get out of there. There you go, buddy. I swear sometimes he just does it as attention seeking.
Yeah, but he wants your attention because he won't pay attention to
So they can't be, as the Bible says, beaten into an inch of your life without, it being absolutely necessary in order for them to stop doing harm to others. That's incorrect.
Hmm?
All right. So working for the profit of a company, you realize that even a rehabilitative prison system, it needs prison guards, especially rehabilitative. I mean, they have
You would still need that. Are you? Yeah, they're prison guards. They're not the owners.
more drain on resources than a punitive system. They need a lot more therapists and nurses, all of these things, right? And I'm not saying
you would need them what are you doing? Are you saying that the prisoners should just be left in an isolated area to fend for themselves with no doctors, no medicine? no guards to actually make sure that they're not getting out of that isolated area? What are you talking about, Alex?
Saying all that's bad, right? There's a happy middle ground, I'm sure, where you wouldn't say everything that these rehabilitative prisons do is good. I wouldn't say everything that these punitive systems do is good either. But
Okay,
when
so
they're
that
working,
wasn't that didn't go anywhere.
like, these people have to be paid. These prison guards, administration, all of these people have to be paid. So they are working for the profit of an organization. It just could happen to be a government organization. Just because it's not a private company.
No. If they're working for the state, then they would be working for the benefit of the state. So if you had the prison guards getting the prisoners and having them do you put them on a bus, take them out and have them pick up trash off the side of the highways, police up litter, clean dumped garbage out of a river, doing stuff like that, then that is using those people for the benefit of the municipality as a whole, not for one singular company to make profits, to basically, to build up the coffers of the CEOs that own that private company. I don't think he understands the difference. I'm not necessarily, I don't have really a problem with hard labor. Like, okay, we've got people who have, it's the same as like community service. You have people who are incarcerated. Now, what can we use these people to do to help pay back to society? Well, they're being incarcerated. That's the punishment for their crime. Is that enough, or can we tack on more? Let's go ahead and we can go ahead and use them. I mean, they're just sitting here. Let's get them out. Let's have them start paying back, making restitution for their slights. Get them in a bus. Highway 41 is a cesspool. It's got a shit ton of garbage on it. If you've been down south and other parts of the country, there are people who dump their garbage. They've dumped full-on mattresses on the side in the medians of highways. Have your prisoners go out and clean them up. I don't have a problem with that, but that works for the benefit of everybody. You're using those people who violated the social contract. They're now custodians of the state or the federal system, whatever, and now they are being used to help with state and federally owned properties. I have no problem with that. So now what does that help do? Well, that helps save taxpayers on organizations that would have to hire people to pay them sums of money and benefits and all that to go out. Does that mean that you just have these prisoners do it without any protection and without any medical care or anything like that? Taking any kind of precautions or anything? No. There would be limitations, right? Sometimes there's a little bit, for some cleanup jobs, you don't want your prisoners going out in just their prison gear, wearing Crocs or whatever, and having them picking up hazardous waste. There could be some ethical issues right there. Oh, who cares? They get sick, whatever. But it seems like Alex is almost going kind of that way where, well, the prisoners could just be isolated in a system where they have to fend for themselves and make their own food. And then and now he's saying, well, look at how much it costs us to have guards. What prison system are you proposing? At first you proposed a system where, well, I think it'd be better for the prisoners to grow their own food. Using what? They're isolated. They're incarcerated. They get to go out and look for resources. They get to cut down lumber and shit. What are you talking about? They're creating their own little power plant and windmills and shit to do their own irrigation. What are you proposing? They just have water that just magically shows up?
Making profit doesn't escape the economic benefit. I would like to see the statistics that say the death penalty doesn't stop criminals. There was a phenomenal debate on Sarah's channel about a week ago, I think. Rachel Wilson was a part of it, and
Okay, there's a ton of them. That's an opinion piece. Evidence does not support the use of the death penalty. This is from Scientific American from March 19th, 2024. It is an opinion piece. I don't know what I could go through, but when AI even says no studies consistently show no evidence that the death penalty reduces crime rates more effectively than long prison sentences. In fact, some studies even suggest that death penalty might increase the rate of some crimes like murder. So I'm sure we could probably go through that would be a whole other discussion, but there's nothing that supports the death penalty reduces crime. There's been other things that have helped to reduce crime. The death penalty is not one of them. Wildheart says, hey, is there a join link, please? I've just been mentally abused by Jill again. No, I'm going to try to just get through this as much as I can. Well, now I'm kind of curious. What did you guys talk about? Hold on.
Mateus, I think, against 2 other people. I suggest everybody go watch that and make up their mind about the death penalty. The state's own people. What would make it so that
See, there's a problem here when he says that they own the people. You mean do the people have, like, is there a level of value to these individuals, right? Can they be considered, can they be evaluated as having some intrinsic value where they could be liquidated? Right. Like they can be assessed for their value and then be liquidated. And so the state can sell these people off and make a profit. So let's say a state or federal prison could say, yeah, you know what, private prison, we'll sell you 5 prisoners for $500,000. And then that will go to helping some kind of federal whatever. And then that private agency, that private organization goes, yeah, great. Well, here's the 5,000, here's $500,000. Now we get free labor. Because we've got these private prisons with their own guards, but their own guards are being paid with, right, by capitalism, not by a government system, not by taxpayer money. All right, what did you do, Wildheart?
I didn't do anything, and I don't want to interrupt your stream. I just got annoyed with Jill, but I didn't want to start up another stream of my own, so I was floating around for places to join. But I don't want to interrupt your stream. Yeah.
Well, where did you talk to him at?
On my stream, I've just finished.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, so he goes over to your channel, but he doesn't go over to mine. I see how he is.
No, I can't get rid of him, honestly. I kick him like 50 times every stream, and he keeps coming back.
Oh, he likes you.
Weird. Yeah.
He likes that abuse. He likes that Christian persecution.
Yeah.
Apparently he doesn't like it when I persecute him, but he really likes it when somebody from Manchester, England does it.
Honestly, I can't get rid of him. Yeah, that's why I ended my stream. He just wouldn't go away. I sang karaoke like 5 times. He wouldn't go away. I argued with him a little bit. I put him backstage like 20, 30 times.
What was he yabbering on about?
We were talking about like whether a god could be all just and all merciful. To me, they are direct contradictions. Yeah.
Yeah. My brother's got actually a really good argument on that one.
Yeah. So we were talking about that. Pixie was there and Hillary's, and we were having a decent conversation. And then Jill just joined, and it just turned into just
a train wreck.
Yeah.
As usual. You're not going up yet.
Yeah, but I again, I don't want to interrupt your stream, so I'll leave and start my own stream up and just talk.
No. Well, just hold. Well, you can hold on. It gives me a time to stretch my legs, and I'm having a little bit of having a cigarette here.
Cool.
I have to go. Put a link. Which Wildheart channel is that? Which one do you not have blocked now? Because I can never keep up.
Yeah. One sec. I should have it open in a tab somewhere.
Because I know you gave me a link to one channel, and I think.
Yeah, I think it's. So
Mid-
I think it's
midnight
called
eight-
out 3 at the moment, but I'll get you on.
Yeah, just send me up. Yeah, just put a link in the
Yeah,
private chat here, and yeah,
yeah.
if I'm because you know that he ran from me, right? He blocked me and he ran.
I'm not surprised, but I didn't know that. No, what happened?
We were having a discussion in a comment thread, and then I accidentally deleted 2 of my comments. So of course he's like, "Oh, you deleted some of your you deleted your comment with your argument." I said, "No, I didn't." And then I looked, and I had accidentally deleted 2 of them, but I had
Yeah.
copies of them, so I didn't repost them. I reposted them in the body of one comment, and I even said, "Here they are." And then I noticed that he had, through looking at the comment thread with my other channel, he blocked me.
Yeah, so now you're running from him because you accidentally deleted 2
So I did a short video and I said, I win. You blocked me and you deleted my comments. I win. Because now if I go back there and I look, none of them are there. Only the 2 test ones are there. So he
Yeah.
actually took the time to go back and actually delete them. Because originally I could go and still see them with my original account, with my main account, but with a secondary account, I couldn't see them. Now, when I go back there with my main account, there's only 2 posts, and they're the test ones that I put up. He never deleted those. He just deleted the one with the argument.
So he's actually being dishonest and saying, yeah.
Well, yeah,
so,
because because if we've ever done that, if we ever said, yeah, he's going on, and we just went, I don't want to chat with you anymore, and you just delete the thread or whatever, he immediately comes back and goes, yeah, see, I win. They deleted their thread. They realized their mistake having a conversation with old Jilly Bean. So
yeah, I got you. Yeah.
So it's what's good for the goose is good for the gander, So I was like, yeah, I win because you blocked me, bitch.
Yeah, but what annoyed me particularly this time is we were having a conversation about one thing, and Jill, when he joined, he just not like changing the topic. He kind of addresses it to start off with, and then within a sentence, it'll just turn into something completely different. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's just annoying. You can't pin him down to one topic.
Yeah, it's like when he's trying to argue that it's a presentism fallacy to argue about slavery in the Bible because you're using your ideas of ownership, buying, selling, and property from a 21st century mindset. And then when you ask him, okay, so what does it mean? What did it mean to ancient Near East Israel to buy, sell, own, and property? What did those mean? What are the best English words that we can use to convey what they actually thought of those concepts, if they thought of them at all?
Yeah. But then he'll stick to the KJV only, which is obviously an English translation. So he must think there are some best words to translate from what they're.
Well, he also said that being a slave can be prosperous. But the thing is that according to him, I don't know how being a slave could be prosperous, since being an indentured. Now, in Leviticus 25, an indentured Israelite could possibly become prosperous, but not. It doesn't say anything about a foreign slave.
Yeah.
Because you are to treat the Israelite as not as an eved, but as a sahir, as a hired worker.
I think I've heard him try and get out of that in saying that if they were foreign slaves, as soon as you made them a slave to a Jew, they will become automatically Jewish.
Well, he goes to they become it's manumission. They're adopted, so therefore it's beneficial to them. But I don't even know how anybody can be really prosperous in any way if the idea of buying or selling or owning anything, like, what does he mean by being prosperous? Does prosperous mean you have a lot of money? Does that mean you actually own a lot of stuff? What does being prosperous mean if they have these different ideas of ownership, selling, buying, and property? What do you? And I can never get an answer. I've asked him multiple times in different threads before. He never tells me.
Plus, there will be no distinction between the laws between Jewish slaves and non-Jewish slaves. If everyone who became a slave to a Jew automatically became a Jew, then why have the distinction between foreign slaves and Jewish slaves?
Yeah.
Every slave will be a Jew.
Yeah. Why would you have this verse that says you cannot treat your Israelite as a slave, you have to treat them as a hired worker? But
Yeah.
as for your male and female slaves, who you may have, you may purchase them from the nations around them, and those you may have indefinitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Plus, then you get into the different rules for male and female slaves. Like the male slaves, you have to let go after 6 or 7 years.
On the 7th year, in Deuteronomy, the females get to go out on the 7th year.
All the females as well.
Yeah, in Deuteronomy, it's different. Just like in Deuteronomy, on the 7th year, you have to give the master has to give them provisions so that they don't fall back into an indentured status. Whereas
Right.
in Exodus 21, there is no such thing indicated in Exodus 21.
Right, I didn't know about that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Leviticus 25, there is no 7th year release. It's a 50th year release.
Yeah. Jubilee. Yeah.
Yeah, 50th year. Yeah. There's sabbatical release. Sabbatical releases are indicated in Deuteronomy and Exodus. There is no sabbatical release in Leviticus 25. It's a Jubilee release. So
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. It's like it's all made up nonsense, but try selling Jill that. You know what I mean?
Well, the other problem is getting into it from a theological standpoint versus like these are the morals of this God, right? So whether or not you go beyond you get into, well, historically the Israelites blah blah blah, and you go, well, this isn't a historical conversation. This is about a theological one, because according to these narratives, this is God telling Moses to tell the people that this is what they can and can't do, right?
Yeah.
So when we get into that conversation, it's a theological one, but then they'll try to switch it to a historical one, and then you go, we're not talking about, because we don't know narratively, we don't know that historically if the Israelites actually practiced slavery at all. There's no archaeological evidence that supports it. There's these writings that seem to say that it looks like they had some writings that supported that. But that's a historical context, not a theological context. So
yeah, because he always says that, like, it's when he says wipe out all the Canaanites or the Amalekites or whatever, he says that's just war rhetoric, and he didn't really wipe them out, but he ordered the wiping out of them. So, like you said, it's between what actually happened and what God ordered.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, they can't have it both ways.
Yeah. Well, they're saying, well, they wrote this up as a way of basically promoting something like their favorite team or something like that. And it's like, no, that's been argued before, and the scholarly consensus is now, did the Israelites actually ever eliminate all of the Amalekites? I don't think there's any other extra biblical stuff or literature or any archaeological evidence that supports that they did.
Yeah.
So,
but I think it actually says in the Bible that they didn't, because in one chapter it'll say that God ordered them to be wiped out, and then in the next chapter it says, but they still remained.
Oh no, and then but then later on it says David finished them off.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Then later on, David finished them all off. I can't remember. Is it in Judges? It's somewhere later on where it actually states that David actually finished them all off.
Yeah.
But then you get into the problem of like, oh, you get to Jill's position where he goes, well, it's because of the satanic things that they were doing. They were, sacrificing children and baby raping and stuff like this. And you go, no, it says right there, it's because of what the Amalekites did when the Israelites were coming out of Egypt. It doesn't say anything about their worship of other gods. It's based on what's written there in Exodus 17. So
plus it makes no sense saying go and wipe out this tribe because they are killing the babies. Go and wipe them out, including all the babies.
They're child sacrificing and stuff, but we'll just save that. You can just go and kill them all and just save it.
That doesn't really help the babies. You know what I mean?
Nope, it doesn't. Yeah, they didn't take him in now, did they? Oh, all right. Well, I'm going to get back to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still think it's funny that you guys give him a chance. I stopped giving him a chance because it just I mean, yeah, it's just a pain in the ass. That's why I stopped covering any of his content. I just, it's not worth it. Because even the videos that I've done where I responded, so I did videos where I specifically, so it was Audible, where I responded to a comment thread where him and I were talking, and to clarify my position, I did videos clarifying my position. He won't listen to him. So there's no. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, if you're not going to do that, then there's no point in even having a one-on-one with you.
Yeah.
And then he just and then
yeah.
and then the only thing that he does is he just basically says, "Oh, well, you agree. You're just going off of Matt Dillahunty, or you're just going off of Justin, or you're just going off of this person." And I'm like,
Look,
no.
that doesn't matter even if you were. If they have valid
Yeah.
points, it doesn't
Yeah,
matter
if
who.
it,
You
yeah,
got
if it's
to.
a valid argument. Yeah. He just tries to poison the well by, oh, well, of course you're gonna agree with Justin because Justin's a fellow non-believer, or you're gonna definitely go with Matt Dillahunty because he's a very well-known, atheist and all. So that's why you're going with them. It's not because they're actually making legitimate points.
Yeah, you got to argue against the argument, not the person that it came. Isn't that the genetic fallacy?
A bit, yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And then there's well, yeah, because I mean, Dan McClellan makes really good arguments he makes really good arguments for why there's slavery being endorsed in the Bible, and he's not an atheist.
Yeah.
I don't believe Kip Davis does. I don't think Kip Davis is an atheist. I think he's a deist or something like that, but he's not an atheist, and he has no problem. Yeah, there's definitely slavery being endorsed there.
Yeah.
Hell, I'm blanking on his name right now, but there was I mean, I did it in the video. I have a book, a commentary for the Old Testament, and there is a section there by a Christian theologian who, yep, there's an endorsement of slavery here. I've read it multiple times to Jill. He does not. He just ignores it. Doesn't work for him. Doesn't work for his dogmatism, so he just ignores it.
So have you tried pointing out that this is not from an atheist and it's a valid argument? What does he just ignore it at that point?
He just, he knows. He knows. He doesn't want. He just doesn't. That person's apparently that person doesn't have it right. Jill always has stuff right.
Yeah. I should have known that. Yeah.
No true Christian, right?
Yeah.
Oh, as Darth would say about killing babies, it's just an early ticket home.
Yeah, I've heard that argument a lot.
Well, what's funny is that Darth Dawkins would also argue that God opens and closes all wombs. So why was he leaving the wombs of these women of these sinful cultures open?
Yeah.
To have children. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. All right. God killed a lot of babies, but now they're in heaven.
Yeah.
Well, so it's okay to kill babies under certain circumstances. I would disagree. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, I'm going to get back to this. You're welcome to stay if you want, or whatever you want to do. I'm going to try to get through more of this because yesterday I got sidetracked in a big way with Warren Obb, and that was an absolute fucking waste of time. Jesus Christ. But
yeah, I'll stay, but I do need something to eat, so I'll leave you alone for 5-10 minutes.
Okay. See ya. My wife is already huffing. I'm not going to be on for much longer, hon. I'm not doing this whole.
But that's okay.
What's that?
I'm just saying, we got a whole house you can go sit in.
You're fine. You're playing around on your phone.
I wanted to turn the TV on or something.
I'm only going to be on for a little bit longer. Can I sit here and be comfortable in my chair? Okay.
Like, if I had somebody in my house, they could not leave. They could not have a family. They could not see their existing family unless I made it okay. I had to tell them when to go to bed, how much time they could be outside. Would you say that I owned this person?
No, I would say that you've wrongfully imprisoned them in your home. First of all, in Deuteronomy and in Exodus, the slave, the Israelite slave that sold himself to a fellow Israelite could have a family. He could be given a wife by his master and have children. The thing is that if he left on the 7th year, he could not take that family with him. If he wanted to stay with that family, he would have to pledge himself to his master for life. The problem with this is that with slavery, slavery is about having ownership of another person. It's that person or persons being the property, the recognized rightful property of some other person or persons. They go out, they buy them, they're their property. Now, rights of ownership can be under the Slavery Convention of 1925, right? Or no, I'm sorry, 1926. The rights of ownership is the way that rights of ownership can be kind of exercised is kind of interesting. So it doesn't have to be, the Slavery Convention doesn't recognize that rights of ownership is pure, or that slavery is purely of a chattel slavery, right? That the person has to be considered movable property in order to be a slave. The supplement also recognizes this as well. What he's talking about is if I have someone in my home who I'm not allowed, so there has to be something that recognizes under some system why I'm able to hold this person in my home, why they're not allowed to leave, why are they not allowed to have a family, whatever. What brought them to that state? Did I kidnap them? Because now we have a problem. Kidnapping was not a good thing. But kidnapping someone didn't make someone necessarily recognized property. In fact, this is recognized in the Bible. Kidnapping a fellow Israelite is wrong. However, this did not stop Israelites from kidnapping other people. There is a story. In fact, where is it? Yeah, it's about the tribe of Benjamin. And so they were nearly annihilated. And yeah, so the kidnapping, the Benjamites were instructed to hide in the vineyards during an annual festival of Shiloh. When the young women of Shiloh came out to dance, the Benjamites were to come out of hiding, seize them, and carry them off to be their wives. Pixie Star says, "You tell him, Mrs. J."
No, you said
Apparently, Pixie heard us arguing. So she responded with, she wrote in the live chat, "You tell him, Mrs. J." Go into another room, let your wife watch the TV. Yeah. You inconsiderate prick. I'm trying to cover this. I thought you weren't coming home until around now. I thought I had a little bit more time. Well, you didn't really say that. You said you had so much time that you had to twiddle your thumbs. Oh, see, I missed that.
certainly be detaining them, though.
So would I have possession of this person?
Possession, but not necessarily. Yeah, whether or not you have whether or not you have actual possession of them as your property, that's entirely different. Jesus, Alex, you work for a channel called the Think Institute. Think about what you're talking about. Yes, I stole this shit from the bank. Therefore, since I possess it, I own it. Oh shit. That's funny.
Hello.
Hey, Midnight.
I mean, you'll see.
It's always good to see me.
It
Anyways.
is.
No.
Are you gonna? Did you come in here to sidetrack me?
No.
Okay. You have any comments on the video?
I don't remember anything from the last time, and I just started watching, so no.
Okay.
Midnight, are you sure you don't want to do any karaoke / anime at the moment?
Okay, dude. Let Jay get back to his video. Seriously.
Yeah.
Could you sell them?
What if I did? What if I found a black market and I sold them on?
But then you're okay. Now he's appealing to an illegal form, right? So black markets are black markets known for their legal legitimacy.
That's a great point. Not black market.
What if I take it to a black market? Okay, you're not clarifying whether or not you actually have a recognized, like, you could actually you have this person is meaning that if something happened, let's say like in the case of like the goring ox, where your slave is gored to death by an ox, does the owner of the ox have to reimburse you for the cost of the slave? Doesn't sound like that's what you're talking about. You have somehow come across someone that you have detained in your home and are basically keeping them from doing stuff and then trying to say, see, I own them. Possession of something does not necessarily equate to rightful ownership of it.
Yeah, it's like when they say you may purchase slaves from the heathen around you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're buying someone, then that means they're already a slave.
Yeah, it's kind of like
it's not kidnapping, basically.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Yeah.
and there's also the idea like you watch these crime shows and they go, well, the murder weapon was in your possession. Well, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't mean you murdered someone.
Does that mean I own the murder weapon? No.
Prisons
then
sell people.
They do, yeah.
They sell people. You think
All the
prisons
time.
sell people?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yes. When there's a prisoner, right, a gang leader.
Where can I buy a prisoner from?
This is interesting because Alex doesn't. I don't know of any. I don't know of any even private prisons that buy prisoners. I've not heard of this. And maybe that is the case, but that's.
Yeah, you just have to have the proper license.
Oh, so I can go online and I can buy somebody right now, can I?
You have to set up a private prison system, and then you have to get
exactly a private prison system. So the people are duly convicted, and then the state recognizes that private prison as a form of as being a place where you can actually incarcerate certain individuals who have been duly convicted, right? So are they still slaves?
get certain licenses. You have to get approved.
Again, they've done something to get themselves to the status of being a prisoner. His first example about having a person in his home didn't explain how he got that person in his home to do that to them to begin with.
Yeah, and so but I've got to go. But thank you for letting me on. Great to see you, Midnight. Cheers. Right.
Yeah, Geo Sam says, you mean there's a legal black market? I didn't know that either, Geo.
Then you have to get the funds, probably some investors. And then what you do when you're starting out a private prison, in order to get people in, you go to the prisons that have the hardest criminals, and you go and you see them and you say, hey, I will take these people off of your hand. You just have to sell them to me. I need
Why? Where is he getting that from? If you have a private prison system, you would. This is really interesting. I don't know if there's any merit to what it is that he's saying. If you have a legal privately owned prison within a given state, if the state allows for that, then the judge is the one that deems the incarceration. And then there's other things in order to transfer the prisoner from, let's say, the state prison or from one state prison to the privately owned prison. I don't know if there necessarily has to be, and I think there's state subsidies that they give to those private prisons in order to help with overcrowding and stuff like that. But I don't think it's clearly as, it's not like, oh, we're buying this person at the value of $100,000 to have them work for us for nothing. I don't think that's how that works. Let me check something here. Yeah, it says no, private prisoners do not pay money to house inmates. Instead, they receive payments from government agencies for each inmate they house. These payments are often on a per diem, daily, or monthly rate. Private prison companies contract with governments, and the contracts specify the rate the government pays for each inmate. Yeah, and then from there, those private prisons can then have those prisoners do certain things, make certain products or whatever that they can then also use to basically make a profit off of. So it's still taxpayer money.
Yeah,
I need 100 grand for that prisoner. I'll take care of him.
and this is the prison system that you're claiming is moral.
I never said it was 100% moral. I'm just saying the state owns these people.
No, they don't. The organization, as I just read, this is absolutely ridiculous.
Well, let
There's
me
no ifs,
explain
ands,
to
or
you.
buts about it.
No, they don't
I think
own.
Alex needs to take some like corrections courses at Lansing Community College or some kind of community college, because that's not how they know.
People, they still have rights under
No, they
law.
don't have all the same rights, by the way.
They still have limited rights, just like slaves have limited. Even in the Bible, slaves had limited rights. They don't have the same rights as full blown as a free citizen, but yes, there are certain rights that prisoners are afforded.
They
Well,
lose
yeah, they
almost
do.
all of their rights.
Well, no, they do.
Almost all doesn't mean that they have no rights, Alex.
The
What
rights
rights do
are
they have
they're
left?
not allowed to be
Well,
confined.
you said almost all, so almost all isn't all of their rights. Do they have the right to life? Obviously, they don't have the right to liberty, right? And it's only in the cases of like death penalty cases where they don't have the right to life. But I think most in this country, the right to life is still recognized for prisoners. Right? And what happens is because of this violation of the social contract, they no longer have the ability, they no longer have the recognized right of the pursuit of happiness and liberty because of the violation that they've done. But that doesn't necessarily violate their right to life. It doesn't mean that their life is now forfeit. The prison systems do have to take care of them. That's how they're custodians of those individuals. And if they own them, do they only like how long do they own them for? If they only have a certain prison sentence, then they don't actually own them indefinitely. So now you're talking more like indentured servitude, not chattel slavery.
And under due process of law. Like, so you can't just, it's illegal to just, I don't know, send somebody to a South American country on a whim. That's against the law. So they do still have rights, even though they are prisoners. Can I just point out that this all came from basically me protesting at all of this sort of slavery in the Bible, and you pointing out that the prison system is basically this moral system like the Bible. And so you're now defending, well, are you defending the prison system, or are you saying, hey,
I'm showing
Right.
you that whether it's a punitive system or a rehabilitative
Uh-huh.
system of prison, which
Uh-huh.
you believe more in, either way, it's slavery. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You can't get around
Yeah,
it.
no.
Yeah, you can get around it. But even if it is slavery, are you saying that so therefore secular humanism is okay with slavery just like Christianity is okay with slavery? And Christianity isn't better.
No.
So you're
So
condemning me for something you approve of. You're just inconsistent with your worldview.
Well, again, that's a tu quo quo fallacy, and
No, you
also
started the super way.
no.
No, you started with the prison system as an example of slavery, as a way of refuting what Mark was talking about when it came to slavery in the Bible. Now you're just saying, well, it's the same thing. It's equal. It seems to be that he's implying that they're equal, right? So you can't bitch about Christianity having slavery if it is the case that in today's in society we have prisons and prisoners are therefore slaves. Are all slaves necessarily prisoners? Are all slaves necessarily duly convicted prisoners? Because that's you don't have that in the Bible. Again, 2 Kings chapter 4. Those two kids, those two sons of that widow were going to be taken as slaves. Were they slaves? Were they prisoners? Were they convicted criminals?
I pointed out the Bible, and you said, "Hey, well, prisons." It
No,
does. You brought
I
up
asked
the
you a question.
prisons.
You said, wait, let's talk about the Bible.
Sure.
That's how this all started.
Alex seems to start with the situation, not how the situation started or how the person got into the situation. I'm noticing that as they're going through there, right? He started with society and then the benefits of society while ignoring how does society come about. Then he started with like his analogy about the person being held essentially against their will in someone else's home, but never got into the particulars of how that person got to that state. So he seems to like to jump in the, it's like, oh, you have a person who's floating in a pool. Okay. How did they get into the pool? It doesn't matter. Well, did they fall out of the sky? Is it a live person or is it a dead person? What got them into the pool? Did they go into the pool on their own? Did somebody throw them in? How did they get into the pool?
Yeah, but we're not debating prisons at the moment. We're debating
Right.
secular humanism
Yeah, I
versus
agree. Let's get off this
Christianity, which
topic.
is the most moral. So in the Bible, you can own people as property. Under
thought we
nowhere
were
under secular
getting off this
humanism
topic.
would that be acceptable at all.
Because a free citizen could own another person as property. It have nothing to do with imprisonment. It would have nothing to do with them being a duly convicted criminal.
Except
I know
for
you
all
want
the
to
points
get
I
off
provided.
I know you want to get off the
No.
horrendous immorality in the
You
Bible.
just said
but
let's
that's
get off
sort
of this
central
topic.
to your
Yeah, you're getting off the topic of imprisonment, not the slavery part. You're the one that's kind of equivocating on, well, if you have prisons, therefore you have slavery, therefore you can't have a problem, therefore you shouldn't have a problem with slavery. And then the only thing that he's actually come up with is like, well, if I have someone in my home that I don't allow to do whatever they want to do, and I restrict them, and I don't allow them to have a family, and blah 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 blah, would you say that they're my property? Are they? How'd they get there? Just the same with the prisoner. How did the prisoner become prisoner? How did they get there? In the Bible, how did the slaves become slaves? It apparently didn't take much for a person to become a slave because 2 Kings 4, outstanding debt, woman has two sons, husband's dead, can't pay off the debt, creditors are coming. take her sons as slaves. Not criminals. A fellow Israelite could sell himself to you. That's indentured slavery. That's indentured servitude, which under our laws is still considered slavery. What slavery are you referring to?
Christianity claim.
No, you just said let's get off this topic, and I agreed.
No,
with you.
no, no,
If you
no,
want
I
to stay,
said
we can
I
stay here
wanted
the
to
whole
point
debate because
out
it looks great for me.
that Alex is now sort of, defending a prison.
Yeah, and that's the other problem, is because he's going to, there's a problem here, because the point here is to argue Christian ethics. And then there seems to be this lack of distinction, whether or not he thinks that there's a difference between the ethics that Jesus was teaching versus all of these things that we have in the Old Testament. Does he think that everything that's in the Old Testament is ethical under Christianity? He hasn't said otherwise.
System that nobody in secular humanism would approve of. It in every country, in this country, I'm not sure how it's viewed in the US. I don't think he's even right about prisons in the US, that the prison owns that person and can sell them to other prisons.
No, there would have to be some assessed value or something like that. You would, and it depends. If you're trying to say if it's like, and the problem is there's the difference between indentured servitude and chattel slavery, right? So there's the distinction there. They're both in today's day and age, they both fall under the category of slavery. But he can be against the prison system, but he can be for a prison system, but be against the idea of free citizens selling themselves into indentured servitude, or children being taken by creditors to pay off a debt.
I think that's true.
You also don't have to have the right to sell something in order to own it.
Like what?
So,
This part's funny. I wish my brother was here for this. I remember this part. You don't have to have.
museums do this all of the time. Somebody gifts them something, the museum retains ownership of it without the right to sell it.
Yeah, that's a very, very specific example. And if something's on
it's possible.
license, well, no, the museum.
It's possible to own something without the right to sell it.
Well, no, in that case, I think the museums buy certain rights, but they hold on to it. There's contracts, but again, we're not talking about a person. We're talking about artifacts. So I don't know why he wants to do this. I don't know why he wants to go down. I don't know why he decided to go down this road.
Well, they don't own it if they're just displaying it on behalf of somebody else.
No, they own it. It's a lease agreement. They're leasing it to this person. When you lease a car, do you own the car? Of course you do.
That's hilarious. Remember, this is a content creator for the Think Institute. He doesn't know how a lease works.
There's a financial company that has interest in your property and can put a lien on it, but they don't own it. You do. You're responsible for it.
If
you lease a car, yeah, there's a certain contractual agreement of how much you're responsible for that leased vehicle, but you don't own it. If it's under financing, then that's pay as you go. They're paying, the bank agrees to fork out the rest of the money, pay off the dealership for the car, you pay back the bank a certain amount over a certain period of time at a certain interest. And you can still sell the car that you are financing through a bank. The only problem is that if you buy a car and then it depreciates and then you sell it, you might only have a certain amount to pay off the loan. You're still responsible for paying off that loan. That's why you have insurance on cars. Because if you get into a wreck, the insurance covers the value of the vehicle. And then sometimes, though, depending on if you have gap insurance or whatever, if you get into an accident and your car's totaled, the insurance payout may not cover all of what you owe the bank on the loan. You're still stuck paying off whatever the insurance payout didn't pay off, and you're without the car.
Lease a car, you don't own it. It's not your property. You're leasing it from some. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if these terms
Yeah.
mean something different in the US. It's weird.
Yeah, but leasing is not owner. It'd be like renting an apartment and trying to say
Alright,
you
so-
own it. Like, yeah, you
Yes,
still
that's
have
correct.
accountability and responsibility to take care of it while it's in your care or, you know, on your person or whatever. But outside of that, you don't have ownership.
Okay, so if you
Okay.
finance the vehicle, you own it.
Well, yeah, but then you've gone into debt for it.
Well, you're recognized as having basically conditional ownership because the bank is saying you are going to be making these payments, right? If you do something, you can do whatever you want with that car. If you wanted to, you could drive the car into the middle of your yard and set the thing ablaze. You still have to make good on that loan though. Under a lease, there might be a little bit more, attached to that, but either way, right? That's what insurance helps to cover. But once you have when you lease a vehicle, you can only, you agree that, okay, I'm not going to put, I agree to only stay within like 10,000 miles a year. If you go over, you get assessed an amount of money for the miles that you go over per year. You know, but as long as everything works within the lease agreement at the end of 2 years or a 3-year lease or whatever, you just, the car goes back. There are dealerships that just take those vehicles back and then they sell them as used.
You actually have paid for it and you
Right.
own it.
So when you have, but there's also somebody who, like, you can't sell that vehicle. You can give it back to the no, you can't. You can give it back to the lien holder.
No, you can sell a car. The lien holder won't take it. You don't want to give it back to the lien holder. You would want to sell it. You're not going to get shit if you give it back to the lien holder. Already owns it. The only way you could do that is just to default on it. But if you default on the loan, that goes on your credit. You're still going to owe on. You're still going to owe on that car.
So that's not selling it.
The lien. When did we get into
Okay.
liens?
When somebody
I think
hold
you
on,
are
hold
so
on,
confused,
hold on,
Alex.
Hold on. I think you are too, Alex. So if I own a vehicle and let's
Mhm.
say I have a loan out on it, I can sell that car all I want and still owe on that debt,
No, you
right? So
can't.
I could still, it actually can vary state to state, but yes,
Okay.
I can.
Well,
yeah.
in most cases, you have to have the permission of the lien holder to do.
No, it's already implied. The financial institution allows you to do that. I don't. How does this guy have 3 children?
that.
No, it's not a lien. Okay, Alex, stop talking
If you
about law.
finance
Okay?
I'm trying
a
to make a
lien
point
is
about ownership.
no, Alex. A lien is a legal obligation that's been settled in court that you owe
Ownership is just about someone having the government, basically the rules, the laws of the land, recognize that a person has legal possession of something. Right? And in the case of somebody financing a car through a bank, they have provisional owner, that's basically like provisional ownership of that car. If they don't make good on the loan, the bank's going to come for them. They're either some kind of, the bank will be covered though. The bank will find a way to cover it. It's called repoing. But you can sell the car. You can't sell the car if it's under a lease. You can default on a lease. It's not good though. You pay fines for defaulting on a lease if you don't make payments. But on a loan, and you can default on a loan. You can just, but if you don't make the payments, then the bank comes and they seize it. And then there's other processes that they could get restitution for what you owe on that loan. But the car is collateral. That's essentially why the bank is able to do that. If you don't pay, the bank can take that property as collateral. It's its own collateral on the debt. They can take it back and they can sell it. and make good on it. To some extent, but you're still going to owe because you sign a contract with the bank.
Somebody money. That's a lien,
No.
right?
Dude, when you buy a house, the mortgage company puts a lien on your property. That's how it works.
They
I don't think he knows what that. I don't think he. Yeah. So the lien would basically be the form of security in which for the loan, they can come and they can foreclose on your home. So when they put a lien out on the home, that's them saying, we're going to come and get that property because that property is our collateral because you're not making good on the loan. Now, this is from Rocket Mortgage. What is a lien? A lien is a legal claim against property that can be used as collateral to repay a debt. Depending on the type of debt owed, liens can be attached to real property, such as a home or personal property, such as a car or furniture. Examples of a lien: mortgages or property tax. Liens are attached to the real property of which the mortgage or taxes are owed. Personal property, such as a car, might have a lien on it if the owner is still paying off the auto loan they used to purchase the vehicle. Judgment liens can generally be attached to both real and personal property. How do liens work? A general lien allows a creditor to seize any and all your assets to pay a specific debt. For example, if you own a primary residence and a vacation home, the Internal Revenue Service can put a general lien on both properties until the debt is paid off. So I think he's kind of equivocating. He thinks that a lien is the same as a loan, where these have distinctions under banking rules. And then so that's a general lien. A specific lien is like a mortgage. It only allows the creditor to seize the property designated in the agreement. If you fail to make payments on your vacation property, your lender can only seize the vacation property and can't foreclose on your primary residence. Yeah, he's got some problems.
No,
the lien
Yes,
comes from going into like default. That's
No.
saying like
No, the lien on your house,
Mhm.
there's a financial interest.
there's a financial interest, but
You cannot sell the
it's-
house without the permission of the lien holder.
You can sell a house if you have a loan, if you have a mortgage on it. Sure you can. But not if you have a lien on it, because that means you haven't been making good on the debt and the bank is going to come and get the foreclosure. They're coming to foreclose on it in that sense. So he's right in that sense. But if you have a mortgage, if you just have a standard, if you have your loan, your mortgage on your home, yes, you can put the home up for sale. The problem is that if you haven't been vested in your property for long enough for it to appreciate enough, then like if you sell too soon, then what happens is that you'll have to eat the cost. You'll have to eat the difference if the home doesn't appreciate enough to cover the amount of the loan that you took out through the lender. It really amazes me that Alex doesn't know this, but he is still young.
I've
On
never,
the
maybe,
title
maybe
company,
this,
there's a lien
maybe
from
this
the title
works.
company.
Maybe this works differently in your country than in mine, but in my country, if you
I bet
take
it
out a
does.
loan and you get a house and you can sell the house, if you get the money from the house, you don't have to do it on the loan, but it's probably a good idea. Like I've known people who have bought a property, it hasn't worked out for them.
Banks would
They have
not
sold.
loan money that way. No bank.
Can I finish? They have
Yes, they do. They loan the money because the property is the collateral, Alex.
sold the property because it's no longer feasible to develop upon it.
This is not making Alex look very good.
and they have paid off the loan with the money that they've recouped plus some of their own to cover the expenses. This is how property basically works in loans. But maybe it works differently over there. I don't know.
No, it works like that over here, Mark. If they want to sell the property, what will happen is it's not a good situation, but if they have to sell and the property hasn't, depending on the appreciation value of the home, yeah, they could end up eating some cost by selling too soon.
It's a payoff. They wouldn't just pocket the money.
Oh,
Like if you sell a house for 500K and you owe 400 grand on it, you have to pay that 400 grand. You can't just pocket it.
Yes, but even if like, I don't know if I really want you to go down the semantics. I don't know if you
can't pocket the 400 grand. The 400 grand goes to the bank. Alex, what are you doing? You do get to keep the 100,000 though. If you buy a home for $400,000 or a 500, let's say, wait, how did he say that again?
500K and you owe 400 grand on it, you have to pay that 400 grand. You can't.
Yeah. But you would never. But if the home appreciates at 500 grand and you sell it for 500 grand, and you owed 400 grand, then the 400 grand goes to the bank and the 100 grand you get to keep. I don't think he knows how loans work.
Just pocket it.
Yes, but even if like, I don't know if I really want you to go down the semantics. I don't know if you like comprehend all of how it operates, but yeah, you still owe. I could still like it. Essentially, if I'm selling my house, I'm probably buying another. Therefore, I'm going through the mortgage company, and I like in order to get that other big mortgage, I'd have to be able to pay. And there's like all of these different roundabout ways of doing things, but
through a title company. And the title company has to fulfill the obligations. Well, you're talking about ownership.
The title company is the bank. Where does Alex live?
I'm making examples of
I
ownership.
know, but I don't think this type of ownership necessarily follows through on the argument, and I don't think it's really the direction you'd want to go in that, because this started with the idea of selling humans, right?
Yes.
And I think that you're kind of off the mark going down the path of leasing vehicles and selling homes.
All right, I shouldn't have said lease, but if you finance the car is the point that I was making.
Okay, yeah, well, let's put it aside because I'm not great with finance, but I think you're worse, Alex. I don't think you're
Yeah, he is. He's lost on that.
I mean, so everybody can fact check this, and
I already did, Alex. You're wrong.
I was exactly right, but I'm okay with that.
Okay, for sure.
No, you're not.
So you sort of pointed out that values and ideals change in secular humanism, and you're correct. I do see this as a strength. As we learn more about the world around us, as we learn more about what makes people well and not well, why wouldn't updating our...
I think that might have been where I left off was that banking thing, because I was just like sitting there shaking my head. I'm like, Alex, what are you doing? And then when you talked about the artifacts I'm like, you're not talking about artifacts in a museum. You're talking about buying people, which is interesting. Well, I can buy something but not have the right to sell it. So you can buy so you can buy a person and not have the right to sell the person. Okay.
Information, like if we find out, say, lead is harmful, for instance.
Maybe we should do that. But it did sound that way with the prison system. If the prison system is incarcerating someone for a crime, then by all means they can sell that person for $100,000 to a private prison. That was his original claim. That was his claim from before.
Why wouldn't we then update what we ought to do via what we found out about these things?
Right. So I would agree that in that situation, like we paint houses with lead, we see lead is harmful, we stop painting houses with lead. We actually make laws against it so that people who own their properties can't use what they want on their properties for the safety of others, right? But it's not an issue.
Well, it's also an environmental concern, but it's a mitigation because there's other things that people use in paint that are harmful. They're just not as harmful as lead.
Of a moral change. The morality behind it is don't use.
And the lead isn't a problem. The lead in paint isn't harmful unless it starts to flake off and you start to eat it. Oh, and it starts to seep into the ground and into the groundwater and stuff. Then you have higher concentrations of lead, and that leads to problems.
chemicals to paint your house. We don't know
Okay.
that lead is a harmful chemical. We find out it is, and it goes into that same moral category. So it's not a
Okay,
change in
so
morality.
It's called the innocence. That's an innocence issue. You're using lead because you think it's okay to use in paint for some. I don't even remember why they used lead in paint. I think it was to help smooth it out. But then later on, and so they didn't think anything was wrong with using lead, and then later on found out, oops, there's problems with using lead in paint. So then they're like, yeah, we probably shouldn't do that anymore.
Where in the Bible does it say? Well, it is a change in morality. It's basically
not.
what to do. Well,
Yeah,
yes,
it was the normative is that using lead was fine. And then the normative changed when they found out that there were problems with using lead. So yeah, it was relative. That's relative. That's relativity.
what we ought to do and what we ought not to
What's-
do. Where in the Bible
What's the
does it
morality
say
change?
change what you do?
It's not really a prescriptive. Well, it becomes a prescriptive change when they say now we ought not use lead in our paint. But it's not. We ought not use any chemicals in our paint or any. Right. It's about the mitigation because you can't you don't want to consume latex paint. There's other chemicals in paint that are not beneficial that are considered harmful if you consume them, but they're not as harmful as lead. So it's about mitigation. It's not a hard. This is really weird.
Based upon the well-being of others or any kind of change.
Well, for example, there's the general equity of the law. There's a law that states that you need to build a fence around the top of your house. This was because people hung out at the tops of their houses and they wanted to protect people from falling off of the house, right? Because there was all sorts of liability issues.
That's a building code issue. But what are you talking about? The fences? Are you talking about railing or a fence? And are you talking about balconies or actually on rooftops? Because the only way you can do that on a rooftop is if it's a flat rooftop and you have built-in drains. Because most building codes on roofs, you can't really do that unless because of the pitch. Because most building codes especially back east, because of snow, they have to have a particular peak. You can have a balcony off the home and stuff like that, and then you're required under building code to have railing, but not a fence.
Obviously, people get hurt, they would die.
So I asked where in the Bible.
And I'm telling you an answer if you don't want to
Okay.
interrupt me. Yeah. And so in this situation, we don't have rooftops that we hang out on. So where does this apply? Well, now we have something that they didn't.
What are you talking? What? No, we don't have rooftop. No, it sounds like you could have rooftops that you could hang out on, as long as you put a fence around your rooftop. I take that back.
And it goes into that same moral category. So it's not a
Okay,
change in
so
morality.
Where in the Bible does it say what we ought to do via what we found out about these things?
Right. So I would agree that in that situation, like we paint houses with lead, we see lead is harmful. We stop painting houses with lead. We actually make laws against it so that people who own their properties can't use what they want on their properties for the safety of others. Right. But
Right.
it's not an issue of a moral change. The morality behind it is don't use harmful chemicals to paint your house. We don't know
Okay.
that lead is a harmful chemical. We find out it is, and it goes into that same moral category. So it's not.
Yeah, that's a prescriptive change. Because originally the normativity was that you could use, so there was a normativity, not a hard prescriptive.
Not a change
so
in morality.
Where in the Bible does it say what is a change in morality?
Not all normatives are prescriptive, by the way.
It's basically
not.
what we ought to do. Well, yes, and what we ought to do and what we ought not to
What's-
do. Where in the Bible
What's the
does it
morality
say
change?
change what you do based upon the well-being of others or any kind of change?
Well, for example, there's the general equity of the law. There's a law that states that you need to build a fence around the top of your house. This was because people hung out at the tops of their houses and they wanted to protect.
Okay. So the rule is that if people are going to hang out on the roofs of their homes, they need to put a fence on the roof of their homes so that they can do so safely.
People from falling off of the house, right? Because there was all sorts of liability issues. Obviously, people get hurt, they would die.
So I asked where in the Bible.
Then I'm telling you an answer if you don't want to
Okay.
interrupt me. Yeah. And so in this situation, we don't have rooftops that we hang out on. So where does this apply? Well, now we have something that they didn't have back then. Maybe they did, but pools, right? So now the law applies
What is he talking about? I don't even know what he's talking about.
in a different way, just like you said. We have this new technology, or we find out this new information about lead paint. We change our law based on it, but it's not a morality change. The morality was already there. Don't use harmful chemicals to paint your house. Now, in the same way, don't make it dangerous.
If you can still use harmful chemicals in paint. There are still harmful chemicals. Those chemicals will be harmful to a certain degree if you consume too much of them. It's about mitigation, not about no harmful chemicals. There's harmful chemicals in paint. This is weird.
For people who are hanging out in your house on the rooftop, or, for example, near a pool. Put up a fence around your pool.
Yeah, but none of that tells me where you got this morality from Christianity.
What do you mean?
I mean, I can
I just
say,
said that.
hey, well, it is immoral. It's always a moral question of whether we ought to do something or whether we ought not to do something. That's always a
The things that he's bringing up seem to be more normative than an ought.
moral question. But what is your definition of
Because it's not the case that you ought to have a swimming pool. It's just if you have a swimming pool, then you ought to put a fence around the swimming pool because it's required by law. Is that the argument that he's making? Because the rule, okay.
morals, Alex? What is your definition
That
of morality?
Well, in this sense, like I can give you my Christian definition of Christian ethics.
that probably should have been the first thing.
Christian ethics is the study and practice of right living based on the character, commands, and redemptive work of the triune God revealed in Scripture and applied by the church.
Yeah, so I guess what the point I'm making, and that you didn't reference the Bible.
It's
there,
not always a moral.
is that well,
way.
Alex,
Or
please. So what
You-
the
you
point
made a
that I'm
statement that was false.
making? Well, I don't care. You can disagree with Alex.
ought.
Please. What the point I'm making?
redemptive work of the triune God revealed in Scripture and applied by the church.
Yeah, so I guess what the point I'm making, and that you didn't reference the Bible.
It's
there,
not always a moral.
is that well,
way.
Alex,
Or ought.
please. So what
You-
the
you
point
made a
that I'm
statement that was false.
making? Well, I don't care. You can disagree with it, but let me speak because you're just interrupting.
That
me
wasn't
now.
that wasn't from the Bible.
Which is kind of rude and obnoxious. So the idea of ethics, right living based upon the commandments of the Bible kind of thing, what I'm pointing out to you is there's certain things that we would say, hey, right living is something extra, right? That kind of thing. What I'm pointing out to you
Let
is,
me go back to that.
well, Alex,
definition.
please. And that you didn't reference the Bible.
Christian ethics is the study and practice of right living based on the character, commands, and redemptive work of the triune God revealed in Scripture and applied by the church.
Yeah, so I'm guessing
Applied by the church. And it's all of them in Scripture. Okay. So it isn't just Christianity, it's all of them. It's right living as revealed in Scripture. So it includes the Old Testament. Neat.
what the point I'm making, and that you didn't reference
But that part about them being applied by the church, it's interesting.
the Bible.
It's
there,
not always a moral.
is that well,
way.
Alex,
ought.
please. So what the
You
point
made a
that I'm
statement that was false.
making? Well, I don't care. You can disagree with it, but let me speak because you're just interrupting me now, which is kind of rude and obnoxious. So the idea of ethics, right living based upon the commandments of the Bible kind of thing, what I'm pointing out to you is there's certain things that we would say, hey, right living is something extra, right? That we shouldn't say, turn our music up loud or do all the stuff that's not in the Bible because circumstances have changed over time. And while I'm saying, hey, it's good that secular humanism changes over time because there's things that were not addressed in the past, you're sort of saying, hey, yours doesn't change. But I'm pointing out that you must have got this from somewhere, and it certainly wasn't the Bible. So where does it come from?
Got what? What specifically?
Well,
You're talking about?
okay, it's like pools, for instance. Like you shouldn't fence in a pool. You didn't get that from the Bible. I can
I
guarantee.
told you
right now.
exactly where I just got it from. It's the general equity of the law. And this is where the normative authority of the church comes in with church councils and canons. And they go through these things. And if something is a big enough moral issue, they will, during a council, have canons on how to address this. A random one was that a priest should not be riding a horse. Well, that was at a time where a horse was a luxury item. And they didn't want priests to be flaunting luxury around the common people because it was like boasting, right? So in this day, you could say, well, priests shouldn't be driving around Lamborghinis, right?
But did that make it wrong for them to drive a Lamborghini? Was that a hard prescriptive or was it just a normative? Like,
it's the same moral law. It's just there's different technology and there's different resources that we have to be aware of.
Well, I would ask what church is a normative authority because there's certainly
That's a
preachers
completely
driving
different
around. Excuse me, Alex. Seriously, stop interrupting, man. It does not make you look good.
It just-
There's a
you
lot of
talked for very
pastors
long.
driving around.
He only
I'm
just
talking about,
started,
like,
Alex.
it was
He
2
literally
seconds.
said he did. He only said like 3 words and you interrupted
Are
him.
you high? What the hell? Look, there's pastors
Big guy's getting tired. He's getting sleepy.
driving around a lot of private planes who say that's perfectly fine and dandy. So which is the normative authority, and according to who?
This is a completely separate debate. We've gotten so far off the topic.
No, it's about Christian ethics. You said there's
Yeah,
a
not
normative
what church
authority,
is the normative authority.
which evaluates
The church is the normative authority.
what the actual morality of a situation is. You said there's a normative authority, which is the church, and I'm asking you, which church is it?
I mean, if you really want to go down here, we can. The Orthodox Church is the normative authority.
Okay.
You want
The Orthodox Church is the normative authority. Now, I find that I did get this far. I find that very interesting because he does content for Joel Sedekase, and Joel Sedekase is a Protestant. He's a Calvinist. But Alex there seems to be appealing to not sola scriptura.
a
Do
debate you
Catholics
want to
agree
get
with
into?
that?
You want to get into a debate about papism and the filioque too while we're at it?
No, Catholics
Right.
disagree with that.
Okay, but
Do
they
they
still
accept
fall
that?
under the purview of Christian ethics. And
Yes,
this
but
very-
Well, yeah, because the church isn't because under sola scriptura, the church isn't the authority. The scriptures are. He's appealing to um the the church is the authority. Apostolic succession. That's how the authority of the Orthodox Church is established in Eastern Orthodox and in the Roman Catholic Church. It's about apostolic succession. I was blanking on the term there. So it's not it's sola scriptura is heretical. So based on what he's saying, the ethics aren't. Yeah, Protestants wouldn't want this.
very much agreement on these issues. This is so far off the top.
Because sola scriptura is heretical in Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholicism. It's not just unethical, it's heretical.
But if you say to a Catholic, well, the Orthodox Church or the patriarchs are the normative authority on all of these moral questions, they will say, no, the papacy is.
Well, they would say to a
The
degree.
pontiff is.
Oh, hey, Mark.
To a
Very-
degree. What do you
Yeah,
mean by
East-
to a degree?
Again, because this is so far off of the topic of the debate.
Why?
Rome sees Eastern Orthodox as in communion with them. So they grant them certain authority,
this out
such
for
as
Mark.
administering sacraments.
Oh, so the
To a
papacy
point.
grants them authority. So they're the norm.
Oh, this conversation is tiring as shit. Hey, Mark, I put that link out if you want to join and give your. I'm already getting tired of Alex. This kid is. Okay. His whole thing on you don't get to sell what you if you get a loan out from the bank, you can't sell what you have. That is okay.
Normative authority.
And then the fact that he brought up and then there was I don't know if you were here for it when he brought up the museum pieces. Like he was going to artifacts. You guys were talking about slavery, and then he went to prisons, and then he went into like owning a person. Like if you have someone in your home that you're not allowing them to leave, and they can't have a family, and they can't do whatever they want, would you say that you own them? And I'm like, it's like he's done this multiple times where he like jumps into a situation without telling us the context of how the person got into the situation that he's put them in. Like, how did the person end up in a person's home again? What seemingly seems to be under the conditions that they cannot leave. They're under the control of someone else. How did that happen? And then he's like, nothing. There's. Oh, hey, Mark.
Hey, mate, how's it going?
How do you not put a craftsman drill to your temple when you have conversations with these guys? You know, an electric drill.
Know. It's my background. I used to work in like customer complaints,
Yeah.
so I've been through it. You know, I've heard some shit, mate. I've
were
heard
snoring.
some.
Sorry, my wife's kind of rolling her eyes at me.
I'll be right off, dear.
Hey, it's getting good. Mark's in here. I'll talk with Mark for a little bit,
Hello.
and then he'll get off. He says hi. Yeah, I don't know how much I might have to split this up, but I've covered a lot more of it today than I did yesterday. But yeah, I think I got about where we're at right now from when I originally listened to it. And then because I was listening to it at work shortly after you had the debate, and I was just like, holy shit. What the fuck, Alex? What are you doing? But I am curious. I don't know if it happens, and maybe I'm jumping the gun, but did you question if Joel Sedecase would agree with this position?
No,
Because
no, I didn't. I look, I was trying to be as fair to him as possible, like sort of
Mhm.
not use personal details to, I mean, just sort of saying, hey, like asking him which is the normative authority is um is totally fine, but like just sort of saying, hey, you hang out with this guy, therefore you don't agree with all of, I think that's
well,
using somebody's personal details
well, no,
against him. Don't.
I would just ask him. I wouldn't use it because of the guy itself. I would ask whether or not he thinks
Okay.
it's ethical, whether or not he thinks it's ethical for somebody who holds to apostolic succession to promote heresy, which is what Joel Sedecase is doing because he's a Protestant and holds to sola scriptura.
Well, is it heresy in Alex's eyes? That's something you've got to ask because
It is under the church, under Roman Catholicism and Eastern
well,
Orthodox. So if he's not in line with, and the interesting thing is if he's Eastern Orthodox, I've heard guys who are from Eastern Orthodox, Andrew Wilson, say they cannot have these conversations with people like you and me because they're not an
oh,
authority in their own church.
really? But they still do it.
Yes.
Wow, that's interesting.
Well, Andrew
Um,
Wilson won't. Oh, Andrew Wilson's made that excuse, and I looked
oh,
it up and come to find out it is a thing.
oh. Where do we find an authority to talk with? where are these people?
I don't know. Because there's a lot of
Okay.
Eastern Orthodox guys that have said that. They go, we can't speak on behalf of the Eastern Orthodox Church because we're not an authority in the church. I think Jim Bob said that too.
Wow. Okay. That's interesting. Well, I mean, so I think so. His position may not be in alignment with the church. Like that's the thing. Like I got what you're saying that's the
Yeah.
church's official position, but he obviously isn't holding that helping a Calvinist.
A heretic? Yeah, helping a heretic.
Right, it isn't heretical, right? Like he obviously doesn't think so, or else I presume if he did, he wouldn't be doing it. I mean, I presume.
The question is whether or not the authority of the church thinks it, because that's what he's appealing to. Not whether or not he thinks of it. He's the one appealing to church authority. He's not going off of his own ethics. He's going off of the authority of the church for his ethics. He's already lost.
That's a good point. That's a very good point, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very good point. Yeah. So if he's appealing to the authority of the church for ethics and he's not doing something that the church would approve of, then I guess you can point out he's not going to the church for ethics at all.
Yeah, he's sidestepping their ethical position and doing whatever he wants to do.
Well, I mean, that's fine. It's just, if like you can't say that he's getting it from the church, but he's sort of trying to hedge. He's trying to say, for the most part, it comes from the Orthodox Church, and sort of saying, hey, there's ethics that Christians have in common, so. But I don't think that's the position of the Orthodox Church, right? I think their position is all of morality comes from the interpretation of the church and the patriarchs.
Yeah, under sola scriptura. Well, under theirs, it's all about the apostolic succession. Apostolic succession is what established the authority of the church, and so the church is basically the mediator of what the scriptures are saying is ethical and so on. But sola scriptura, the authority rests in the Bible.
Yeah. And the person can interpret it themselves. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. That was the schism that were Protestants and the Eastern Orthodox and Catholics. That's why Catholics were burning, Protestants at the stake.
I mean, the Orthodox had a schism before that. That was the first one, where basically the patriarchs said that they had apostolic succession, and the Catholic Church says no, we have apostolic succession, which is funny because the Eastern Orthodox, they will stamp around saying, hey, we have a long line going back to the original apostles, kind of thing. We have this succession, and the weird thing is that the Catholic Church has that as well. Like they have a line going back to Peter.
They all do. I can't remember. I read somewhere where the breakup was between the Roman Catholic Church and Eastern Orthodox, and I can't remember the specifics of what caused it. But yeah, they're both Orthodox in that sense. But
Yeah,
and they're both very much not for, as Slim Jim, who is a devout Catholic, at least last time I checked, he still is.
Really?
He said he calls Protestants dirty, nasty proddies.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. I thought he was Eastern Orthodox as well.
No, Slim Jim is devout Catholic.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Very much
Does that
so.
work?
Work in what sense?
Well, I mean, like you say, if the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholic Church considers each other's sort of heretical beliefs, so I don't know how that, like, is it just, the threat of atheism is so bad that they have to work together, kind of thing? Is that what we're talking about? It's like, common enemy makes weird bedfellows, kind of thing. Is that what's happening?
Oh, yeah, it looks like a combination of theological and political factors culminating in a mutual excommunication in 1054. It was part of that Great Schism. That's where the Roman Catholic Church came about, was during that Great Schism.
Yes. Yeah. That's interesting.
Yep. So
yeah, no, that's a really good point, Jay. I didn't consider that at the time. I think he's sort of trying to say, hey, there's fundamental core beliefs maybe that the church has sway over, and then all the rest around it, people just go with whatever they want. But that, I don't think that's sufficient to say that somebody has an authority because they just happen to all agree that Jesus rose from the dead. I don't think that is a common moral ground, and I think that Catholics and Orthodox, that they would vary in their morality, like what you ought to do under any certain situation. I don't think they're as sort of morally compliant with each other as they think they are.
Yeah, well, like I said earlier in this, because when you were giving your opening statement, you did a good job of explaining what secular humanism is, and I think that's another thing that Alex, and I did mention it either in my last one or in this one too, that Alex takes for granted that he lives in a secular society where he, as an Eastern Orthodox, can go on YouTube and work with a Calvinist on presuppositional videos under Christian ethic, under if you have Christian ethics and the Christian ethics are deeming that sola scriptura is unethical, then you would never, and you have that established in a country, and you're saying that's the best thing for a society, which seemed to be what he was arguing for. Kind of like when I don't know if you were here for it, but he said it was that part where you asked, he said about the good of a society, and you said no, it's about the well-being of humanity. And
Yes.
he didn't understand the difference. He doesn't understand the difference. So what he was arguing for was like, there's a system called society, and as long that's the utility. So the utilitarianism is about how well does the society work, and if the society is working, if the majority of people are working great, and there's these select individuals that are a burden to society, then we can just isolate or segregate or do whatever we need to do in order to maintain the societal system. We can spit in the face of the principle of human dignity for the sake of the majority of the society. He doesn't understand that you're starting from the principle of humans or the principle of dignity for humans, humanity, and then how they make society. He doesn't
Yeah.
understand. He's working from society. He's going from that position. Oh, we have society. Okay, how did we get to society, Alex? How does a society become what it becomes? It starts
Right.
with humans and what humans agree and how they establish that society. Societies don't just pop out of midair. They're agreed upon. It's the same thing he's been having. It's the same thing he's been having a problem with when it came to the analogy that he gave of a person being in someone's home that you don't allow them to leave and have a family. He never explains the context. Like, how did that person end up in that position? He goes to situations, but he doesn't go to the context of how the person or persons ended up in the situation. Like when he went to prisons, he never brought up that he brought up that they were duly convicted. That's how a prisoner becomes a prisoner. They're tried and convicted.
Sure.
That's how they become a prisoner. They're not bartered like cattle.
Right. But I think I would have gone into, like, I only had 8 minutes to start, which is kind of, a bit slim, but I would have liked to go more into the greatest happiness principle kind of thing, like, balancing what people want and need with sort of, how it affects the rest of society. But you're right, he seems to take a top-down view of society, like, you establish something to tell society what to be rather than organically growing it from the people that live in it. He seems to think that you kind of put the authority in the top and then tell everybody what to make that society into.
Yeah.
And that's not how societies develop, right? It works organically from people deciding what they want and then grows from there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I don't think he got a lot of what I was saying. And his analogies, I've heard some bad analogies, but some of them were. Have you gone over the finance stuff yet? I would not let this man anywhere near an account in a company.
We just passed that. Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And Raging Tomatoes, she did a good job. She's like, I don't think you really want to. She made the right call. I don't think you really, because then he brought up a museum artifact, and I'm like, because she said this. She said, well, you're going into the buying and selling of homes and cars. That's not people. That's not buying and selling people, right? So it didn't.
Yeah.
You're talking about, and then if you want to say, well, if you can buy a car, then you should be able to buy a human, right? And it's like, really? You want to go? Wait, are
Christian
you saying
morality, ladies and gentlemen? Christian morality.
Are you saying I can? Are you saying, Alex, that I could own you or own your children, but not have the right to sell them? Where the fuck is the benefit of that?
Yeah. And plus, it's weird because museums sometimes have things on loan from, owners of the artifacts. Like somebody may own a painting and give it to an art gallery to display or a museum to display. They might have these bones or some other artifacts that they might give to display. Like, for instance, the crown jewels, right? They're displayed in the Tower of London, like basically displayed in the museum, but the museum doesn't own them, right? The royal family owns them. So he just doesn't have an understanding of ownership like at all. Like,
Well,
just because...
Well, when he brought up sorry to interrupt, but when he brought up the black market, I'm like, really? Are black markets legal? Are black markets a way of getting having recognized legal ownership over it? Because that's predominantly what the problem is that he just thinks having possession of something is ownership. I'm like, if I have possession of someone else's pet, that does not mean that I own them. If I'm taking care of someone else's dog, I'm in possession of that animal, but I'm agreeing to take care of that animal. That does not mean I own that animal. I own my other dog.
Yeah.
But then there are people who
maybe he took the possession is 9/10 of the law a bit too literally, because I don't think it is. Like, it just definitely isn't. And what about the leasing stuff? He's like, well, if you lease a car, you own it. It's like, what? I'm sorry, what?
No, just like if you lease a rental property. I have a lease when it comes to renting. The lease is the rental agreement for the home that I live in. I don't own the home. I have certain private property rights that extend
Mhm.
by being the renter of the people who own the property.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
no, I can't sell this property because again, it's not my property. I'm renting it from someone else. And it could even be the case. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's the case that the owners, my landlords, are still paying back a loan on a bank. They still have a mortgage. They
Right.
don't own this home outright.
Right.
But again, if you sell this, if they decided to sell this home, and if the home doesn't have an appreciation value to it, then whatever they owe the bank is they have to eat.
Yep.
That's just how that works when it comes to financing. You're still going to have, now you're obviously, if you're going through a real estate agent, which you have to, it's very difficult now to try to even own property outright and not do it through a real estate agent, but because there's laws and stuff like that here in the States, because of money being exchanged, large amounts of money being exchanged, anti-terrorism kind of shit.
okay.
But the what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so when you sell the home through the through a realtor, yeah, it's essentially, how do I put it? I don't even know how to put it. It was baffling to me. I kind of lost my train of thought there, but it was baffling to me that he didn't seem to like. And he goes, "Oh, and then they put a lien out against your home," and I'm like, "Well, there's two different kinds of liens," and I looked it up on a mortgage company. If the bank puts a lien against your home to foreclose upon it, then no, you cannot sell it because you are not making good on the loan. So they put a lien on it to foreclose, basically as a warning. If you don't make good on what you owe us in loan payments, we're going to
Right.
take the property because the property is collateral. They
Right.
still that property is collateral essentially on its own loan. And I thought it was interesting that he didn't seem to really understand that.
He didn't
I'm like,
understand what a lien was at all.
no.
Like he's saying when you take out a mortgage, you take out a lien, and it's like, no, that's not what that is.
Well,
Like
we don't normally.
that's
Yeah, we normally call it a mortgage, but according to the mortgage company, that's considered like a general lien, I think, is how it's put in mortgage practice here. It's still but normally when people hear the bank put a lien against on your home, that means that they're leaning in on the amount that you owe.
yeah.
You're not making
Yeah.
good on
Okay,
the
gotcha.
loan, so they put a lien so they can foreclose upon you. It's
Mhm.
it's a nuanced distinction, but either way, it's easier for the sake of there's loan and lien. Lien normally means they're going to come for that property because you're not making good on the loan. So they're just
Gotcha.
going to take the property, they can sell it, they can do whatever they want, and then they can come after you for the rest or whatever. If you file for bankruptcy, whatever you got to do, somehow or
Yeah,
another the bank is going to try to make right.
but it's not ownership. It's a legal right to claim that as like the collateral against the debt. It's not them owning it. That is what sort of he thought, and it's like no, no, no.
Well, he thought you couldn't. Yeah, he thought for some reason that because you were paying money to the lender that you don't have a right to sell the
Yes,
property. But the agreed upon thing is that the ownership is yours under the good faith under the making good faith payments to the
yes,
lender.
yep, yeah. And you own that. You own that property, but
Yeah.
you have debt in your name. And I don't like it's just bewildering that you can't, you're an adult human and you do not understand that when you buy a house, you buy it with a loan and you own the house, but you're in debt for that loan. Like it's
Well,
not
what's funny is he had a computer right there in front of him, and then he made the claim that anybody can fact check me. I'm 100% right on this, and I'm like, no, you're not. And you had a computer right there in front of you. You could have clicked on an extra tab and done a quick Google search and found out that you were wrong. You're not correct at all. That what Raging Tomato and what you said are correct. If you are financing something, you can sell it if you want. The problem is that if you sell something and you still owe whatever amount that you have on the debt or on the loan, you have to make good on it. It's like I gave the example of apparently he doesn't know how insurance works, right? If I buy a $50,000 car and then I have it for a year and then I get into an accident and it's totaled, the bank might pay out, the insurance might assess the value of the vehicle at only $25,000, and then come to find out I still owe on the loan $35,000 because of
Yep.
the high finance or whatever. So I'm in the hole for 10 grand. The insurance company is going to pay the 25 grand to the bank, but now I'm still on the hook for 10 grand. That's where we get, I don't know if they have it in Australia, but we have gap insurance. Gap insurance helps to protect that depreciation.
Okay, gotcha. Look, I'll be honest with you. I don't like my wife. She worked in insurance, like health insurance, so she handles all of that. Look, I do the computers. She does the insurance because that's her
yeah.
field. I think there is gap insurance, but I don't think it's as prevalent here. I really don't think so.
Yeah, they here in the United States, because now they started going to because of the astronomical prices on automobiles now, they go to 7-year loans. So obviously, if you're paying on a loan for over 7 years, and depending on the interest rate of those loans, they recommend that they'll sometimes you can opt in for you pay out like $1,200 or something like that. I have it on my car. So if I get into an accident with my car and they say, okay, we're only going to pay, insurance is only going to pay 7 grand and you still owe us 9 grand, then I use my gap insurance and then it pays off the other 2 grand.
So. No, that's yeah, interesting. Yeah. I'm not sure about that one, to be honest with you.
Yeah. But it's normally in the case of vehicles, because obviously vehicles don't normally appreciate, they depreciate. Whereas with real property like homes, land and stuff like that, they have an appreciation to them. So normally once you buy them, they normally recommend you stay in a home for 4 or 5 years before you try to sell. If you do like what you said in this conversation, if for some reason it doesn't work out, you can still sell it, but you still end up owing the bank whatever's left over. It was the same. It's not a hard concept, and he did not seem to understand that at all. And I'm like, do you own a home, Alex? Because holy shit. You could.
I don't know.
Do you think you're stuck in that home? Do you think you can't sell that home? Do you think you have to pay off that entire home? So under what he was saying, he seemed to be saying that if you have a 20 or 30-year mortgage, which most people have a 30-year mortgage, you can't sell that home until you pay off that 30-year mortgage. You pay off either the entire property or you sit in that home for 30 years until you pay off the entire loan. Then you can sell it.
I can't even remember why it came up. It would just seem to be these random things that he brought up. Like, this is the thing. This was, and sort of an error of this. I'd understand if I somehow trapped him in this conversation about it. It's like an unforced error. Like he basically dug this hole himself.
He brought it up because he just threw it out, that saying that you could own something, but you don't have the right to sell it. That was his claim. He just threw it out. He asked you the question. He just said, "Well, you do know that you can rightfully own something, but you don't have the right to. You can own something, but you don't have the right to sell it." And then he brought up the museum artifacts, and then he brought up property, like a car and your home. That's how that started.
Yeah,
and then. And like I said, he had a tendency to do this. And the thing about the fence around the house, around the roof of the house, that was weird to me. I don't know where that, like, people used to hang up if you wanted to hang up on your roof, then you had to have a fence around your roof. And I'm like, fence around the roof?
I thought he was talking about. No, I thought he was talking about around the pool, right? So you have to fence your pool.
Well, he brought up two. So he brought up two things. He brought up one about if you're going to have people hanging out on the roof of your home, then you have to have a fence up on the top of your.
Does he mean a railing? Like a railing?
Well, yeah, and that's normally for balconies. I mean, normally,
yeah.
Like normally, if you have an apartment complex and you go up on a particular roof of a building, then there's sometimes railing. If there's a place for people to hang out, then they normally put up some kind of railing, to keep people from
Yeah.
just accidentally tripping and over the, falling to their
Well,
death.
I presume it'd be the same for like a fence around a pool, right? Like it's not out of nowhere that we made regulations that people have to I don't know in Australia if you have a pool, you have to have a fence around it just
Yeah,
because
it's a safety.
a lot of children died like falling into pools. So now we made this. It's not out of nowhere. It's not like we've
Yeah,
just
it's a bit.
decided
Yeah,
that.
yeah, and they normally start to apply it to building codes for safety reasons. Like you said, okay, if
Mm.
you're going to have a pool, you need to have a fence around it so that little tykes can't just wander in and bloop.
Exactly.
Done.
Exactly.
But under his position, he'd be like, well, what happens if you've got a kid in the pool? What do you do? I'm like, how did the kid end up in the pool? Well, I don't know. He was bringing up stuff where it was like you were in the middle of a situation, but there was no context to like how you got there. And again,
Yeah.
the prison thing, I don't know where he got the idea of the $100,000 that the private prison would pay for like the most hardened criminal to
I
come
have no
work at
idea.
their. I don't know where he got that from. I don't know if he was watching like Escape Plan with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, but I'm like, yeah, the private prisons were meant as subcontractor or contractors.
I don't
So
know where he got the idea that the prisons own people.
that's been an ongoing debate for years because of that 13th Amendment, because the 13th Amendment states that it abolishes slavery, but it leaves it open as a punishment for
Yeah.
a duly convicted person. The problem is that the 13th Amendment doesn't specify that being a slave could be used as punishment in lieu of either as a person who's incarcerated or in place of a person being incarcerated. That's the problem, right? If you say I'm not going to imprison you, I'm going to the state is going to basically allow said individual to purchase you from the state and you become a slave to them, or you become an indentured worker to them, or something like that for a matter of 6 or 7 years. Then you could either have this chattel issue, the chattel slavery issue, and that's the other problem. He seemed to be sticking more to an indentured servitude kind of line of slavery, which still
Right.
leaves open the chattel slavery, which I don't know if you were here when I brought this up, was the way to kind of the question that I had would be to Alex, do you think all slaves are prisoners, or is it that all prisoners are necessarily slaves?
I think the second one is probably where he sits, because he seemed to think that all well, I mean, I don't think that's moral either. No, any kind of ownership of people, even if someone has been convicted of a crime, I don't think that's moral either.
Yeah,
So
and yeah.
yeah, I think that's highly but it's weird that he keeps pointing towards this corporate prison systems and going, see, we do it here. It
But
doesn't, like, just because it's legal doesn't
but
mean
he's
it's moral to do.
yeah, and there's also the issue where that's one of those situations where he doesn't bring up how the person got into the prison system to begin with. They weren't sold into the system rightfully. They weren't of an indentured service, an indentured status to where they sold themselves to the state, right?
Right.
Like what happens in the Bible with a fellow Israelite. They get to a point to where they can sell themselves to a fellow Israelite, and according to the Bible, the fellow Israelites cannot treat them as eveds, but they have to treat them as sahirs, which is a hired worker or bounded laborer. That's
Yeah.
not the case with prisoners. They're basically found guilty of a crime, and that's their punishment, is to be incarcerated, to be segregated away from society.
Yes.
So this was a problematic. The other problem that he seemed to be and I brought this up too, was to squash that little conversation, would to be bring up 2 Kings chapter 4, and it's a narrative called the widow's oil, where this widow appeals to Elisha because her husband has died, and he had outstanding debt, and so the creditors are coming to take her sons as slaves. And
Wow.
Elisha does not say that that's wrong. you have this miracle that's performed with a jar of oil. She has a jar of oil, and then she has her go to her neighbors and collect all these empty vessels, as many empty vessels as she can get, and bring them to the house. And that one jar of oil is used to fill all of these other jars of oil. And then she sells those extra jars of oil and makes the money and then pays off the creditors. But if she didn't do that, if that miracle had not happened, those creditors were taking her sons as slaves.
Interesting.
That's one of the more damning verses that you can use in the Bible when you're talking to someone about slavery in the Bible.
And it seems
Because
to be very reminiscent about the wine in the New Testament, doesn't it? Like you just have one jar of wine and it multiplies.
or the loaves and the fishes. Yeah,
Yep.
kind of like that.
Mm.
But yeah, I'm probably going to end this here, and I'll probably get back to it later. My wife has given me the look, like you've been on long enough.
Oh yeah, sure. No worries at all. No worries at all.
But yeah, this was what's that, hon? You can say what the. If you start walking through the house humming "My Name Is Mud" from Primus, I'm gonna.
Just wondering what we're doing for dinner.
I don't know, but we'll talk about that. I'll get off here in just a minute since you're.
Well,
you're
give my
getting-
best to your wife. I'll jump off, but yeah, thanks for reviewing this. Hey, I'm always open. Like if you want to criticize, I am more than happy. I really want to get better, and I hope that like I want to get sort of secular human out there more as an alternative. Like it comes across from when you talk to Christians that like the only moral system is Christianity. You know, you hear people like Jordan Peterson say, well, if you're really an atheist, then you're, you know, some person out of Dostoevsky's, Crime and Punishment, that you've got absolutely no compunction with doing anything. And I really want to push back on that. I think this year I'm going to be trying to really push back and say, hey, we can easily have morals and values, and the most secular countries are doing very well, like Scandinavian countries and things like that.
Yeah. Like I said, I enjoy your debates because I know how it. I got into an impromptu conversation with Warren Obb yesterday, and he's a treat to talk to.
Who?
He goes by McGruber, I think McGruber, and he also goes by Warren Obb. He got convinced of Christianity. He got convinced of Christianity via Darth Dawkins.
Oh no! Oh dear! Yeah, that's always a disaster. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it was, but that's the thing. You do better at these than I do, because when you're in these kind of conversations where you are having the conversations, it's one thing to look at these conversations and then you got like hindsight being 2020. It's another thing when you're in the moment and you're kind of like, oh yeah,
absolutely.
you're trying to think of something to say, or somebody said something and you missed it, and then you're like,
absolutely.
Shit, yeah, it's that's why sometimes I like watching like Dr. Josh when he talks to people, because he will slow the tempo down.
Yeah.
Dr.
Josh, he's amazing.
Yeah, he'll slow the tempo down for that reason, because if you start getting into this, like some in-depth literary critiques and stuff, you got to slow it down. You got to think about what it is that you're, and that's one of the things I admire about Dr. Josh is, to him, it's not about firing off quick, fast. It's about doing the scholarship justice. So you want to just kind of keep, but I think you did excellent here. But watching the little smirks and stuff on Alex's face, that would be enough for me to want to just like, hey, stop it. Cause you'd see him kind of, but it is what it is. He's young, and unfortunately somebody allowed him to breed. But sorry, I couldn't.
Oh no, that's terrible, man. Look, there's no requirement, there's no license, all right. So
I'm not a secular humanist. I have no problem with restricting people's breeding.
Oh, okay. That's no, I definitely wouldn't agree with that. But each to their own. That's not a problem.
Hey, in my opinion, I agree with Bill Burr. Human flourishing 80% of you all got to go. If you got a form to fill out, if you didn't bring a pen, you're already out.
Okay. Wow.
It's his joke. It is his jokes about overpopulation. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
He goes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
He goes
All right.
once. He goes,
Well,
once
I
that's-
won't go into that. That's a whole. You're trying to start a whole nother conversation when you
Yeah,
said you
I
have
know.
to go. Like,
I gotta go.
Jay. All right. Take
I
care,
told
my
you.
friend.
Tangents. All right. See you, Mark.
See you, mate.
All right. And on that, thanks, Mark, for joining. Thanks everybody who participated. Bye.